Case 1. On December 20, 1996, Julie Buskin, a 21-year-old university student in Oklahoma City, was reported missing after she failed to return home following an early morning drive to the airport. Hours earlier, residents at her apartment complex reported hearing a woman scream in the parking lot before dawn. When Julie did not appear for a scheduled lunch later that day and could not be reached, concern quickly escalated. Her car was also missing, adding urgency to the situation. Within a short period, investigators began to suspect that Julie's disappearance was not voluntary. Julie's last confirmed movements began the previous evening. She spent time with friends and later drove her roommate to Will Rogers World Airport in the early morning hours. Surveillance and witness accounts placed her leaving the airport alone shortly after the drop-off. Around 5:30 a.m., residents at Julie's apartment complex reported a scream coming from the parking area, prompting a 911 call. No suspect or vehicle was seen at the time. By midday, Julie had failed to meet friends and did not respond to calls. Her absence was formally reported, and law enforcement initiated a search focused on her apartment, travel route, and known contacts. Julie Buskin was known as a dedicated student and aspiring dancer. She was working toward a bachelor's degree and had plans to open a dance studio after graduation. She held a part-time job at the university golf course and was described as socially active, well-liked, and reliable. Investigators found no evidence of personal conflicts, recent disputes, or behavior suggesting she intended to disappear. Her routine was predictable, and she was known to trust familiar environments. Friends and family reported no concerns in the days leading up to her disappearance, reinforcing the belief that an external act had interrupted her normal routine. Approximately 12 hours after she was last seen, Julie's body was discovered at a lake roughly 15 miles from her apartment. Her hands were bound, and she had been shot once in the back of the head at close range. Forensic examination indicated sexual assault. Investigators documented 2 sets of footprints leading to the water's edge and only one set returning. A footprint consistent with a size 9 men's Nike running shoe was preserved. Nearby, a pink leotard belonging to Julie was recovered and later found to contain male DNA. Her car was eventually located near her apartment complex, containing red sand consistent with the lake area. Her phone was missing, and phone records later showed calls made after her death, including one to a weather service. For years, the case produced few leads. Investigators interviewed numerous acquaintances and tested DNA from more than 200 men. A composite sketch based on a witness who followed Julie's car near the lake generated tips, but no arrest. The investigation regained momentum when Anthony Castillo Sanchez came to police attention years later. He lived near Julie's apartment at the time of the crime and owned shoes consistent with the footprint evidence. Records revealed that a phone number dialed from Julie's phone closely resembled that of one of Sanchez's former partners. Ballistic analysis linked the bullet used in the killing to a firearm associated with Sanchez's residence. When DNA testing technology advanced, Sanchez's DNA was compared to the sample recovered from the leotard, producing a definitive match. Anthony Castillo Sanchez was arrested and later convicted of Julie Buskin's murder in 2006. He received a death sentence. Over the years, he pursued multiple appeals and claimed that another family member was responsible, but those claims were reviewed and rejected based on DNA probability analysis. The conviction stood, and the case became a landmark example of the power of preserved evidence and advancing forensic science. Julie Buskin's case remains cited in discussions of cold case investigations, illustrating how delayed justice can still be achieved through methodical evidence handling and scientific progress. Case 2. On May 31, 1984, Laura Sammons, an 18-year-old college student, was found murdered in a rural field outside Murfreesboro, Tennessee. She had failed to arrive at several planned destinations that afternoon, raising concern among those who knew her. When her body was discovered, investigators immediately noted signs of a violent and personal attack. Clothing found at the scene and the condition of her body suggested she had been killed elsewhere or moved shortly after her death. From the outset, the circumstances indicated that Laura had encountered someone she knew or trusted. Laura's body was discovered by a local farmer who noticed clothing lying in a field along his route home. Upon closer inspection, he realized a body was concealed beneath the garments and contacted authorities. Laura was partially unclothed, with additional clothing items placed over her body, including a pair of men's jeans. The autopsy determined she had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely caused by rocks found nearby. Evidence also showed that she had been intimate with someone within the previous day. At the time, investigators could not determine whether her final movements involved consent or coercion, leaving critical questions unanswered. Laura Sammons was a student at Middle Tennessee State University and worked as a cashier at a local grocery store. On the day she disappeared, she completed her work shift around midday and planned to attend a university appointment before going swimming at her grandmother's home. She never arrived at either location. Her car was later found near her workplace, miles away from where her body was discovered. Laura was socially active and maintained relationships with friends and former partners, but there was no indication she was involved in conflicts or dangerous behavior. Her routine that day appeared ordinary, making her sudden disappearance all the more alarming. Investigators pursued multiple leads in the early stages of the case. Witnesses reported seeing Laura at a nightclub the night before her death with an unidentified man, but he was never located. A former boyfriend was examined but ruled out due to an alibi. Forensic testing was limited by the technology available at the time, restricting the usefulness of DNA and hair evidence recovered from the scene and from Laura's vehicle. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. Despite interviewing numerous individuals and exploring multiple theories, authorities were unable to establish a clear suspect or reconstruct Laura's final hours. Years later, the case was revived when a former acquaintance of Laura became a police officer and was assigned to cold cases. Advances in forensic science allowed previously collected evidence to be retested. DNA analysis of the men's jeans found at the scene revealed blood spatter patterns consistent with the attack and confirmed the blood belonged to Laura. Investigators re-examined earlier suspects and focused attention on David Gilley, a former boyfriend who had initially been cleared. New witness statements contradicted his original alibi, and his physical profile matched the clothing evidence recovered at the scene. In 2000, DNA testing confirmed that David Gilley was the source of the biological material found on the men's jeans, directly linking him to the crime. He was arrested 16 years after Laura Sammons was killed. At trial, prosecutors argued the motive was jealousy and loss of control as Laura moved on with her life. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For Laura's family, the conviction marked the end of a long and painful wait for answers, closing a case that had remained unresolved for more than a decade. Case 3. In the early 1980s, two teenage girls were murdered in neighboring villages in Leicestershire, England, 3 years apart. The crimes occurred in quiet rural areas and involved similar methods of restraint and killing. At the time of the first murder, investigators treated it as an isolated incident. When the second killing occurred years later, the similarities became impossible to ignore. Together, the deaths of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth revealed the presence of a single, unknown offender operating undetected within close-knit communities. On November 21, 1983, 15-year-old Linda Mann left her home in Narborough to visit a friend but never arrived. When she failed to return by late evening, her family alerted police. The following morning, her body was discovered along a footpath near her home. She had been assaulted and strangled, with clothing removed and scattered nearby. Despite extensive searches and interviews, investigators were unable to identify a suspect. Nearly 3 years later, on July 31, 1986, 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth disappeared while walking home from work in the nearby village of Enderby. Her body was found days later in a field, showing the same pattern of assault and strangulation. The repetition suggested a single perpetrator, but no arrest followed. Linda Mann was a schoolgirl known for her routine habits and familiarity with local walking routes. Dawn Ashworth shared similar traits, attending the same school system and traveling alone along footpaths commonly used by local residents. Both girls lived in areas considered safe by their communities. After Linda's murder, families encouraged young people to walk in groups, but no structural changes were made. When Dawn was killed, fear spread quickly, as residents recognized the similarities between the cases. Despite this, early investigations failed to connect the crimes conclusively, and no sustained suspect focus emerged. Investigators initially concentrated on Richard Buckland, a local teenager who worked at a nearby psychiatric hospital. Buckland made inconsistent statements and eventually confessed to Dawn Ashworth's murder, later claiming responsibility for Linda Mann's death as well. He provided details that appeared to match the crime scenes. However, the confession raised concerns due to contradictions and Buckland's limited intellectual capacity. At the time, forensic testing relied primarily on blood type analysis, which could only narrow suspects to broad population groups. With no definitive physical evidence, Buckland was charged, while doubts about the reliability of the confession persisted. The investigation took an unprecedented turn when DNA fingerprinting was introduced. Genetic material from both crime scenes was analyzed by a forensic scientist pioneering the technique. The results demonstrated that the same man was responsible for both murders, but Richard Buckland's DNA did not match the samples. Buckland was released, becoming the first person exonerated by DNA evidence. Investigators then conducted a voluntary mass DNA screening of thousands of local men. During this process, it was discovered that Colin Pitchfork had persuaded another man to submit a sample on his behalf. Further testing exposed the deception, and Pitchfork's DNA was conclusively matched to both murders, leading to his arrest. Colin Pitchfork pleaded guilty to the murders of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth in 1988. He received a life sentence, though the absence of a minimum term recommendation caused public concern. The case drew widespread attention for its groundbreaking use of DNA evidence, which reshaped criminal investigations worldwide. For the families of Linda and Dawn, the resolution came after years of uncertainty. The case remains a landmark in forensic history, demonstrating both the fallibility of confessions and the transformative power of scientific evidence in criminal justice. Case 4. Between 1983 and 1987, a series of assaults and murders occurred in Virginia, targeting women inside their homes. The crimes shared consistent features, including forced entry, restraint, sexual assault, and strangulation. At the time, the incidents were investigated separately by local agencies. Early assumptions treated each attack as an isolated event. Only years later did investigators recognize the pattern, indicating a single offender operating across multiple jurisdictions. The earliest known attacks occurred in Arlington County in 1983, beginning with abductions and sexual assaults involving women encountered in their cars or homes. Over several months, the violence escalated. In January 1984, Carolyn Hom was found bound and strangled in her garage. Shortly afterward, David Vasquez, a fast food worker with limited intellectual capacity, was arrested and confessed to the crime. Despite inconsistencies between Vasquez and witness descriptions, the confession led to his conviction, and the assaults in Arlington stopped. Authorities believed the threat had been eliminated. That assumption would later prove incorrect. In 1987, similar crimes began occurring in Richmond, Virginia. Debbie Davis was found bound, assaulted, and strangled in her apartment. Weeks later, Susan Helms was discovered murdered under nearly identical circumstances less than a mile away. Diane Cho, a 15-year-old student, was killed in her bedroom after reporting being followed by an unknown man. Sue Tucker was later found murdered in her home in Arlington County, showing the same method of entry, restraint, and killing. The victims differed in age and background, but the crime scenes shared unmistakable similarities, indicating a consistent offender. Investigators from Richmond and Arlington began sharing information as the pattern became clearer. Crime scene details showed repeated use of bindings taken from household materials, forced entry through windows, and strangulation. Geographic analysis revealed that the offender moved between jurisdictions, exploiting gaps in coordination. The crimes in Arlington and Richmond were reviewed alongside parole and incarceration records to determine whether a single individual could account for the timeline. Analysts noted that the offender appeared to stop during periods consistent with incarceration for unrelated offenses, strengthening the serial offender theory. Attention turned to Timothy Spencer, a convicted burglar with a history of parole violations. Records showed he had been released to a halfway house in Richmond shortly before the 1987 murders began. Surveillance confirmed that Spencer frequented locations connected to multiple victims, including the Cloverleaf Mall. He was observed violating parole conditions and traveling between Richmond and Arlington on dates consistent with the attacks. Investigators collected a blood sample and submitted it for DNA analysis, a technique that had only recently been used in criminal cases in the United States. DNA testing matched Spencer to biological evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes in both Richmond and Arlington. The results led him to the murders of Debbie Davis, Susan Helms, Diane Cho, and Sue Tucker, as well as several surviving assault victims. The findings also excluded David Vasquez from involvement in the death of Carolyn Hom. Spencer was arrested in January 1988 and charged with multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. The DNA evidence established a direct forensic connection across jurisdictions, confirming the existence of a single serial offender. Timothy Spencer was convicted later in 1988, becoming the first person in the United States convicted of murder based on DNA evidence. He received multiple life sentences and was later executed in 1994. Following the conviction, David Vasquez was exonerated and released after serving years in prison for a crime he did not commit. The case marked a turning point in forensic science and criminal justice, demonstrating the reliability of DNA evidence and reshaping how serial crimes are investigated and prosecuted across jurisdictions. Case 5. On March 3, 1987, Kathy Odom was found brutally murdered inside her home in Harris County, Texas. Her 4-year-old daughter, Tasha, survived a violent beating and was discovered unconscious, while her infant son was found unharmed in his crib. The crime scene immediately suggested a personal attack rather than a random intrusion. There were no signs of forced entry, and the level of violence directed at Kathy raised suspicions that the perpetrator was someone familiar with the household. Police were alerted after Kathy's husband, Mike Odom, failed to reach her by phone and asked a neighbor to check on the family. When officers entered the house, they found Kathy's body in the bedroom. She had been stabbed repeatedly, strangled, sexually assaulted, and bound with an electrical cord taken from a lamp. Her clothes were found neatly folded on the floor. Blood was present throughout the room. Tasha was located on the living room sofa with severe head injuries, while the infant remained asleep. Investigators initially focused on Mike, noting stains on his clothing and inconsistencies in his account, as well as the possibility that the attacker had attempted to clean up before leaving. Kathy Odom had been married to Mike since her teenage years, and together they had 2 children. Her family described her as devoted to her role as a mother and determined to maintain stability despite a troubled past. Both Kathy and her sister had previously struggled with substance abuse, influenced by their spouses, but Kathy had made efforts to turn her life around. Extended family relationships were strained, particularly involving her sister Shelley and Shelley's husband, Greg Marquardt. Greg had a history of criminal behavior and drug use, and his interactions with Kathy in the period before her death had caused concern among those close to her. The investigation moved through several suspects. Mike Odom and the neighbor who checked the house were examined closely, but forensic testing later showed that suspicious stains were not blood, and both men had verifiable alibis. Attention then shifted to Greg Marquardt. He had been present in the home previously, had a known fixation on Kathy, and had access to the house on the day of the crime. His alibi left a significant time window unaccounted for, but early forensic testing relied on blood typing, which could not conclusively identify him. With no definitive physical evidence, the case stalled and remained unresolved for years. In the late 1990s, the case was reopened as DNA technology advanced. Investigators re-examined preserved evidence, focusing on the electrical cord used to bind Kathy's wrists. New testing methods demonstrated that skin cells could transfer during acts such as strangulation. DNA extracted from the cord revealed a profile consistent with Greg Marquardt, narrowing the pool of possible perpetrators to a small percentage of the population. Greg claimed he had been involved in a consensual relationship with Kathy and said she was alive when he left, but investigators determined that his DNA could only have been present on the cord if he had bound her during the attack. Greg Marquardt was arrested in 2002 and later confessed to the crime while in custody, describing how he attacked Kathy after she rejected him and assaulted her daughter to force compliance. In 2004, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He died of liver disease in 2008 after serving a portion of his sentence. For Kathy's family, the conviction brought delayed resolution but no relief from the loss. The case highlighted the importance of preserved evidence and evolving forensic science in resolving violent crimes long after they occur. Case 6. On March 26, 1993, 16-year-old Raina Risson vanished after completing a short shift at an animal hospital in La Porte, Indiana. She was expected to meet her former boyfriend later that evening but never arrived. When she failed to return home, concern grew quickly. By the following day, her disappearance was no longer considered routine. The discovery of her vehicle nearby, positioned in a way that suggested mechanical trouble, introduced immediate doubt. From the start, investigators believed Raina's absence involved deliberate human intervention rather than an accident. Witnesses later reported seeing Raina outside the animal hospital shortly before 6:00 p.m. with two unidentified men in a sedan. Some described what appeared to be an argument, though no one intervened at the time. Raina's car was found abandoned not far from her workplace with the hood raised, keys in the ignition, and her purse and money still inside. Officers were able to start the car without difficulty, indicating the breakdown had likely been staged. Early interviews focused on Raina's former and current romantic partners. While initial statements appeared cooperative, no clear suspect emerged, and the investigation quickly lost momentum. Raina Risson was a high school sophomore known for her academic discipline and compassion for animals. She held multiple part-time jobs and hoped to become a veterinarian. Friends described her as responsible and family-oriented. Her relationships were closely examined, including a recent reconciliation with a former boyfriend and a prior relationship with Jason Tibbs, who had a history of minor criminal behavior. Raina remained on speaking terms with Tibbs, and acquaintances confirmed she trusted familiar people. Nothing in her behavior suggested she intended to disappear voluntarily. As weeks passed, the case grew colder. A jacket belonging to Raina's former boyfriend was found miles away, but it yielded no usable evidence. In April 1993, Raina's body was discovered in a pond north of Lawport, weighed down with logs. An autopsy determined she had been strangled. Several individuals drew attention during the investigation, including a serial false confessor and a family member with a criminal past, but each lead collapsed under scrutiny. With no physical evidence linking a suspect to the crime, the case remained unsolved for years. In 2008, investigators received a letter from an inmate named Ricky Hammonds, who claimed he had witnessed critical events as a teenager in 1993. He described seeing Raina's body in the trunk of a car driven by Jason Tibbs and another man. This account led police to Eric Feldman, who agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Feldman stated that Tibbs abducted Raina outside the animal hospital, strangled her after she attempted to flee, and later disposed of her body. The statements aligned with long-standing, unanswered questions in the case. Jason Tibbs was arrested in 2013, 20 years after Raina Risson was killed. At trial, the prosecution relied on witness testimony and corroborated timelines rather than physical evidence. Tibbs was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison. He filed multiple appeals, maintaining his innocence and naming an alternate suspect, but those efforts were denied. For Raina's family, the verdict ended decades of uncertainty. The case remains an example of how delayed witness testimony can alter the course of a long, cold investigation. Case 7. In September 1993, 15-year-old Jessica Roach disappeared while riding her bicycle near her home in Georgetown, Illinois. When she failed to return, her family quickly realized something was wrong. Her bicycle was later found abandoned on the road, but there was no sign of Jessica herself. Initial searches produced no answers, and days turned into weeks without any indication of where she had gone. The lack of immediate evidence delayed the understanding of what had occurred, leaving her family and community in a prolonged state of uncertainty. Jessica was last seen on September 20, 1993. After her bicycle was discovered, police organized searches and distributed missing person information, but no credible sightings emerged. Approximately 6 weeks later, her remains were discovered in a rural area of Perrysville, Indiana, across state lines. The advanced state of decomposition limited what investigators could determine about the circumstances of her death. Environmental exposure made it difficult to establish an exact timeline or recover forensic evidence, complicating the investigation from its earliest stages. Jessica Roach was described as a motivated teenager with clear ambitions. She had expressed a desire to become a pilot and was supported by a close-knit family. Her disappearance deeply affected her community, which organized searches and later memorial events in her name. There was no indication that Jessica had conflicts or risky behavior that would explain her sudden disappearance. The randomness of the crime and her young age intensified public concern and pressure on law enforcement to identify the person responsible. Attention eventually turned to Larry Hall after reports surfaced of him following young girls in the region. During NG questioning, Hall exhibited suspicious behavior when shown Jessica's photograph. He later provided a confession that included claims of abducting and killing her, along with statements implicating himself in numerous other crimes. Investigators recognized a pattern of exaggerated and inconsistent confessions, raising concerns about their reliability. Despite this, certain details Hall provided aligned with known facts of Jessica's case, keeping him under scrutiny. Investigators separated Hall's false admissions from corroborated evidence. While many of his claims could not be verified, aspects of his account regarding Jessica were supported by independent findings. Law enforcement determined that Hall's involvement in Jessica Roach's murder was credible based on the totality of the evidence, even as other confessed crimes were discounted. This careful distinction allowed authorities to move forward without relying solely on his statements. Larry Hall was convicted of Jessica Roach's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The The conviction brought a measure of closure to Jessica's family after years of unanswered questions. In the years that followed, her loved ones established memorial efforts and a scholarship in her name to honor her memory. The case remains a reminder of the challenges posed by delayed discovery and unreliable confessions in homicide investigations. Case 8. On September 21, 1996, Danielle Hinn, a 15-year-old high school student from Belgrade, Montana, was reported missing after she failed to return home from a planned solo fishing trip. She had told her family she was going to spend the day at Cambridge Fishing Access, a location she had visited before and considered familiar. When hours passed without contact, concern quickly grew. Later that day, her truck was found abandoned near the fishing area, immediately raising fears that something had gone wrong during what was supposed to be an ordinary outing. Danielle left her home that morning with fishing gear and no indication that she expected company. When she did not return by evening, family members began searching the area themselves. Authorities were notified after her truck was located parked near the fishing access. The vehicle was unlocked, and her personal belongings were still inside. There were no visible signs of a struggle around the truck, but Danielle was nowhere to be found. As daylight faded, search teams expanded efforts around the surrounding marshland and water, operating under the assumption that she could be injured or lost. Danielle Hinn was known to be close to her mother, Cheryl, and spent much of her free time outdoors. She followed a predictable routine and was comfortable being alone in nature. Her family described her as quiet and independent, with no known conflicts or risky behavior. The fishing trip was not unusual for her and was intended as a peaceful escape. The isolated nature of the area, however, meant there were few witnesses and limited opportunities for someone nearby to notice suspicious activity. Several hours after the search began, Danielle's body was discovered in shallow water not far from where her truck had been parked. She was found face down in the mud. The medical examination determined that she had been suffocated, with evidence indicating her head had been forcibly held down until she died. Investigators documented signs of assault but found little physical evidence pointing to a suspect. Despite extensive interviews and searches, no clear leads emerged, and the case eventually went cold. In 2019, investigators reopened the case, hoping advances in forensic science could succeed where earlier efforts had failed. Preserved evidence was sent to a specialized laboratory for analysis. Traditional DNA database searches produced no matches, prompting law enforcement to pursue genetic genealogy through court authorization. This process ultimately identified Paul Hutchinson, a man who had lived in the area at the time of Danielle's death. In July 2024, investigators interviewed Hutchinson at his home. His behavior during the encounter raised concerns, but before further questioning could occur, he took his own life. Following his death, forensic analysts confirmed that the DNA recovered from Danielle's case was a match to Hutchinson. Although no trial would take place, authorities formally identified him as responsible and closed the investigation. Danielle's family issued statements acknowledging the resolution while recognizing the years lost without answers. Law enforcement also announced a review of Hutchinson's past to determine whether he could be linked to other unresolved cases, marking the final chapter in a crime that had remained unanswered for nearly 3 decades. Case 9. In late 1998, Melissa Patton, a young mother of 2 living in the Atlanta area, vanished without explanation. She maintained regular contact with her family, making her son in silence immediately concerning. Despite her absence, her husband never reported her missing, nor did he notify her parents that she was gone. As weeks passed with no word from Melissa, unanswered questions began to accumulate, and her disappearance took on a troubling tone that suggested she had not left voluntarily. Melissa's last known contact with her family occurred on Thanksgiving Day in 1998, when she spoke with her parents by phone and discussed plans for Christmas. After that call, she was never heard from again. When she failed to attend holiday gatherings and later missed her mother's birthday, her family became alarmed. In April 1999, dismembered human remains were discovered discarded in trash bags in wooded and residential areas. The remains were found months apart, complicating identification. The condition of the body suggested deliberate dismemberment and concealment, immediately indicating a homicide. Melissa was married and raising 2 children at the time she disappeared. Family members later described her marriage as troubled, marked by documented domestic violence. Her relationships with extended family had grown strained, particularly as concerns mounted over her safety and isolation. Despite these difficulties, Melissa was devoted to her children and remained in contact with her parents, making her sudden disappearance inconsistent with her behavior. Those close to her believed she would not have abandoned her family without explanation. As investigators worked to identify the remains, attention turned to their location. The areas where the body parts were recovered were near a workplace previously associated with Melissa's husband. Investigators also noted the use of tools consistent with deliberate dismemberment. Reports surfaced that a saw had gone missing from that workplace around the same period. While these details raised suspicion, the lack of conclusive forensic evidence at the time prevented charges. The case stalled, leaving Melissa's disappearance unresolved. In 2003, advances in DNA testing allowed authorities to identify the remains as Melissa Patton. During this process, investigators examined the possibility of family involvement and formally eliminated Melissa's father as a suspect based on incarceration records and DNA evidence. With that avenue closed, focus returned to Melissa's husband, Christopher Wolfenbarger, whose actions following her disappearance continued to raise concern. Despite long-standing suspicions, prosecutors still lacked sufficient evidence to move forward at that time. In 2024, the case was re-examined using modern investigative techniques. Law enforcement announced that new developments had strengthened the case against Christopher Wolfenbarger, leading to his arrest in August of that year. Investigators stated that he had been a person of interest from the beginning. Family members publicly expressed relief that the case was finally moving forward, while acknowledging the pain of revisiting the loss. Legal proceedings remain pending, as authorities prepare to present the evidence surrounding Melissa Patton's death more than 2 decades after she disappeared. Case 10. In October 1987, the body of a newborn baby girl was discovered discarded inside a dumpster behind a business in Riverside, California. The infant had no identification, no witnesses connected to her birth, and no immediate clues pointing to who she was or who had left her there. The discovery shocked the community and prompted an urgent investigation, but with no missing persons reports or hospital records to reference, the newborn was known only as Baby Doe. The infant's body was found by a man searching through trash for recyclables. Authorities responded and secured the scene, confirming that the baby had been born alive. An autopsy conducted by the Riverside County Coroner's Office determined that the newborn had been killed shortly after birth. The findings ruled out natural causes and established the case as a homicide. Investigators canvassed the surrounding area, interviewed nearby residents and businesses, and searched for reports of unattended births or missing infants, but no immediate leads emerged. With no name, family, or medical records, investigators faced significant obstacles. There was no information about the baby's mother, no indication of where the birth had taken place, and no witnesses who could provide context. The lack of physical evidence beyond the body itself limited investigative options. Despite sustained efforts, the case produced no suspects, and as time passed, Baby Doe's identity remained unknown, leaving the case unresolved. For decades, the investigation remained dormant. Leads were exhausted, and traditional methods failed to produce answers. In 2020, The Riverside Police Department's Cold Case Unit revisited the case in collaboration with the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Team and a nonprofit organization focused on advancing forensic justice. Investigators decided to pursue advanced DNA analysis, recognizing that modern genetic technology could succeed where earlier efforts had failed. Using preserved biological evidence, forensic analysts generated a DNA profile and applied genetic genealogy techniques. The analysis ultimately identified the baby's mother as Melissa Jean Avila, who had relocated across the country in the years following the crime. In August 2024, Avila, then living in Shelby, North Carolina, was located and arrested with assistance from federal fugitive task forces. The identification marked the first definitive breakthrough in the case since 1987. Avila was extradited to Riverside County, California, where she was formally charged in connection with the death of the newborn. She was booked into the Larry D. Smith Correctional Facility, and bail was set at $1.1 million. Prosecutors stated that DNA evidence would play a central role in the case. Court proceedings are pending, bringing the investigation closer to resolution nearly 37 years after the infant was found.
A powerful political figure and his wife vanish without a trace. Their sudden disappearance sends shockwaves through the city, setting off a desperate search. But when investigators start connecting the dots, the truth that emerges is more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The prime suspect? Their own granddaughter. Samara, a city with a deep history and a strategic location along the Volga River, is a place where power, business, and crime have always been entangled. Behind its modern skyline and bustling industrial hubs lies a darker world, one where fortunes are made in the shadows and alliances can be as deadly as they are profitable. For years, the missing man had been at the center of it all. He wasn't just a politician, he was a force in Samara's elite circles, someone who shaped policies and controlled vast wealth. His wife, equally powerful in social spheres, was his closest confidant. But now, both of them had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of questions. And the most chilling part? Every piece of evidence pointed to their granddaughter. Why would she commit such an unthinkable crime? Was it about money? Revenge? Or was there something far more sinister behind her silence? And most importantly, was she really acting alone? Viktor Terov, the family's patriarch, built his empire from the ground up. Born in Kuibyshev, he started as a Soviet-era chemical engineer but had ambitions far beyond the laboratory. Over the years, he climbed the political ranks, using his knowledge of industry and his connections to cement his place among Samara's elite. Eventually, he reached the pinnacle of power, becoming the city's mayor, a position that granted him not only political influence but also deep control over the region's economy. With that power came immense wealth. The Terov family lived in luxury estates, owned fleets of high-end cars, and had access to privileges that few could imagine. Business leaders, politicians, and even criminal figures sought their approval, knowing that Viktor's influence could open doors, or shut them permanently. But behind the facade of wealth and stability, cracks were beginning to form. Old alliances were shifting, and the next generation of the Terov family had become a wild card in their carefully controlled world. And soon, that instability would lead to a crime so shocking that it would shake Samara to its core. Katerina Terova was born into a life of privilege in 1995. Unlike most children, she never knew limits, there were no restrictions, no boundaries, and certainly no financial struggles. Growing up in the Terov dynasty, she had everything handed to her. Expensive gifts, private tutors, exclusive parties, money was never an issue. Her mother, Luda Terova, had been raised as the heir to the family's power, but instead of following in her father's footsteps, she chose a very different path. By the 1990s, she was deeply embedded in the criminal underworld, surrounding herself with figures from organized networks. Despite the opportunities her family's influence provided, she was drawn to high-risk ventures, dangerous relationships, and illegal dealings. Her first husband, Konstantin Sherbakov, was connected to one of Samara's most powerful crime syndicates. When he was killed in 2001, she quickly moved on, eventually marrying Sergei Loganov, a man notorious for his involvement in large-scale oil fraud. His illegal dealings brought in millions, but in 2010, his empire collapsed when he was arrested for orchestrating an attack on a federal agent. He was sentenced to prison, leaving Luda to fend for herself. But she didn't stay out of trouble for long. By 2022, she was arrested for blackmail after attempting to extort money from a regional deputy with threats of public humiliation. Her plan failed spectacularly, and she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Meanwhile, Katerina had already carved out a reckless path of her own. Unlike her mother, she had no need to hustle for wealth, it was always there. But her indulgent spending habits, her love for the nightlife, and her growing dependency on prohibited substances quickly spiraled out of control. She was reckless, entitled, and completely unprepared for a life without the safety net of her grandfather's money. And when that safety net was pulled away, her desperation would lead her to unthinkable actions. Katerina Turova's life was a downward spiral in slow motion. What started as a life of luxury and privilege turned into something far more destructive. She had no financial discipline, no career ambitions, and no real responsibilities, just an endless cycle of extravagant spending and reckless indulgence. But as her habits escalated, so did the consequences. She had long been drawn to Samara's elite party scene, where alcohol and prohibited substances were commonplace. What started as casual indulgence soon turned into full-blown dependency, consuming her life and leaving her desperate to maintain her expensive habits. In 2016, while in Cyprus, she met an Israeli citizen, and their whirlwind romance quickly led to marriage. By 2017, they had a son, but family life didn't change her ways. She continued to drink heavily, cause public scandals, and behave erratically. Her husband tolerated it for a while, but by 2019, he had enough. He filed for divorce, took custody of their child, and Katerina returned to Samara, abandoning her responsibilities as a mother. Back home, she expected life to continue as before, but her finances were crumbling. The money wasn't coming in as fast as she was spending it. She maxed out credit lines, borrowed from acquaintances, and when that wasn't enough, she started selling off valuables, designer handbags, jewelry, family heirlooms, anything that could bring in cash. But her biggest problem came when her grandfather, Viktor Terov, finally cut her off. Realizing that she had no intention of changing, he reduced her financial support, trying to force her into responsibility. Instead of learning from it, Katerina saw it as a betrayal. The one person who had always funded her lifestyle was now standing between her and the only thing she truly cared about, money. Her resentment festered, turning into full-blown rage. And at some point, she came to a chilling realization: if Viktor and Natalia Terov were gone, all of their wealth would be hers. By 2023, Katerina Turova's financial situation had hit rock bottom. She was drowning in debt, with creditors demanding repayment, but she had no job, no income, and no way to maintain the lavish lifestyle she refused to let go of. At first, she tried to access her grandfather's wealth legally. She attempted to convince him to sign over assets, pushed for more financial help, and even tried to sell family heirlooms behind his back. But Viktor Terov wasn't a fool. He had spent decades in politics and business, he knew how to protect his wealth. He refused to give her control over his assets, cutting her off even further. That's when she realized the truth. As long as Viktor and Natalia were alive, she would never have the money she needed. But if they were gone, she would inherit everything. She began planning. Not impulsively, but methodically. She researched different methods, poisons, blunt force trauma, ways to eliminate evidence. She read about forensic investigations, how authorities track digital footprints, and ways to dispose of bodies without a trace. Then, she started making suspicious purchases. Plastic barrels, chemical agents, heavy-duty bags, and protective suits, all ordered online, paid for using various accounts to avoid suspicion. She had a plan, but there was still one question left unanswered: how would she execute it? In early January 2025, Viktor and Natalia Terov suddenly vanished. No calls. No sightings. Nothing. To their friends, it made no sense. Viktor was always reachable. His silence alone was an immediate red flag. But before anyone could piece it together, Katerina was already in the middle of covering her tracks. What happened next would shock the entire country. In January 2025, Victor and Natalia Taraf vanished without a trace. No warnings, no goodbyes, just silence. At first, no one panicked. They were influential figures, constantly moving between business meetings and high-profile social events. But when their phones remained off for days, people started to worry. Victor never ignored calls, especially from his closest associates. On January 3rd, he missed multiple important messages, including a birthday greeting from a longtime friend. That was the first real sign that something was wrong. Then came the suspicious message. One of Victor's former deputies received a text from his phone. The message was short and vague, all questions to Katerina. That alone set off alarms. Victor was known for his professionalism, always writing in perfect grammar. But this message? It didn't sound like him at all. As the hours passed, more people tried reaching the couple, but neither responded. No public appearances, no security footage, no financial transactions. It was as if they had simply disappeared. Concerned, Victor's assistant filed an official missing persons report. Within hours, investigators were searching for clues, looking through bank records, phone logs, and surveillance footage. And soon, all signs began pointing to Katerina. When police entered Victor and Natalia Taraf's residence, something felt off. The apartment was too clean, unnaturally spotless, as if someone had gone out of their way to erase any trace of what had happened. Forensic specialists began testing surfaces, and their suspicions were confirmed. Traces of chemical agents were found throughout the home, the kind often used to eliminate biological evidence. A more thorough search revealed microscopic blood residue in the bathroom and kitchen. When tested, it was identified as belonging to Victor and Natalia Taraf. But that wasn't all. Surveillance footage showed Katerina Tarova carrying a large blue plastic barrel into the apartment before her grandparents' disappearance. Later, the same barrel was seen outside the building, but its contents were unknown. She was also seen disposing of heavy-duty bags, though their contents were never recovered. Investigators then turned to her financial activity, and what they found only deepened their suspicions. In the days following the disappearance, there were multiple failed attempts to access Victor's online bank accounts. Someone was trying to transfer large sums of money, but the transactions were blocked due to security measures. At the same time, Katerina was selling off her grandparents' valuables at an alarming rate: jewelry, religious icons, even Natalia's car. She was desperate for cash. With every clue leading back to her, the police had enough to move forward. It was time to bring Katerina in. Forensic experts continued their investigation, and what they uncovered only confirmed their worst fears. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a crime. In the bathroom and kitchen, investigators detected microscopic traces of blood, invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable under forensic analysis. DNA tests confirmed the worst: the blood belonged to Victor and Natalia Taraf. But there was something even more disturbing. The absence of a large amount of blood suggested that the bodies had not been dismembered in the apartment. Instead, forensic experts believed that chemical agents had been used to dispose of the remains. Security footage and witness statements provided another chilling detail. Neighbors reported seeing an unidentified man near Katerina's apartment around the time of her grandparents' disappearance. Some believed he helped her carry heavy objects, possibly assisting in disposing of evidence. His identity remained a mystery, but authorities suspected he wasn't just a bystander. Investigators then turned their focus to a landfill site, one of the suspected disposal locations. A large-scale search was conducted, sifting through tons of waste in hopes of finding anything that could confirm what had happened. But by the time authorities searched the site, it was too late. The sheer volume of trash, combined with time and decomposition, meant that nothing conclusive was found. Still, the evidence against Katerina was mounting. And soon, the police had enough to make their move. When authorities arrived at Victor Taraf's apartment to arrest Katerina, she didn't resist. She didn't cry, panic, or even ask why she was being detained. Instead, she remained cold, emotionless, as if the situation didn't concern her. At the station, investigators began their interrogation, but Katerina was far from cooperative. At first, she refused to speak, claiming she felt unwell. When she finally did, her statements were inconsistent, contradicting both the evidence and her own previous claims. She insisted she had nothing to do with her grandparents' disappearance, saying they had left on their own. But investigators had already uncovered her financial transactions, her attempts to access Victor's accounts, and her rushed sale of family assets, clear signs of a financial motive. When confronted with the forensic evidence, the blood traces, the chemical agents, and the surveillance footage of her handling the barrel, she changed her story again. But her explanations made no sense, and the investigators weren't buying them. Although no physical remains had been found, the forensic evidence was overwhelming. Katerina had no alibi, no logical defense, and every clue pointed to one conclusion: she had planned and executed the crime herself. And now, she was facing the consequences. Katerina Turova's trial became one of the most sensational court cases in recent history. The brutal nature of the crime, the powerful family involved, and the shocking betrayal captivated the nation. News outlets covered every detail, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal analysts, and spectators eager to witness the downfall of a once privileged heiress. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum penalty, a life sentence. They presented an airtight case: financial motive, forensic evidence, suspicious purchases, and Katerina's own erratic behavior. Everything pointed to a cold-blooded, premeditated murder carried out in pursuit of wealth. But one question remained: did she act alone? Investigators suspected she had help, possibly from Vitaly Lukin, an inmate she had been in frequent contact with before the crime. Phone records showed multiple conversations and money transfers between them, but there was no concrete proof linking him to the murder. Without hard evidence, he remained under suspicion but was never formally charged. The public was divided. Some saw her as a ruthless, entitled murderer, driven by greed and desperation. Others believed she was a pawn, manipulated by criminals more powerful than her. Adding to the mystery, Katerina suddenly stopped speaking altogether. During court hearings, she appeared detached, unresponsive, and unwilling to answer questions. Was she suffering from genuine psychological distress, or was this a carefully crafted legal strategy? The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation, one that could determine whether Katerina was truly broken or simply playing the system. As the trial continues, the nation watches, waiting for the final verdict. Katerina Turova remains in custody, her silence unbroken, while prosecutors present their final arguments. The court has yet to decide her fate, but one thing is certain: this case will be remembered for years to come. Beyond the legal battle, the consequences of her actions ripple far beyond the courtroom. Her young son, now without a mother, remains in legal limbo. With his father living abroad, the question of custody remains unresolved. Meanwhile, Viktor Terev's vast fortune, estimated at millions, is frozen, tangled in legal disputes. Under Russian law, Katerina is barred from inheriting anything due to her conviction, leaving the fate of the Terev Empire uncertain. This case stands as one of the most shocking and sensational crimes in Russian history, a chilling tale of wealth, greed, and betrayal that shattered an influential family. Was Katerina a calculating murderer, or was she just a product of the corrupt world she was raised in? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was justice served? Do you believe she acted alone? If you found this case fascinating, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the most shocking crimes of our time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. In the small town of Somerville, Texas, where the church was the heart of the community, a shocking scandal unfolded. A preacher's secret affair with a lonely woman led to jealousy, betrayal, and murder, shaking the town to its core. This is a story of love gone wrong, a life lost, and justice that changed Somerville forever. In 2012, Somerville was a quiet town where life moved at a slow pace. People gathered for Sunday church services, shared meals at community dinners, and spent evenings talking on their porches. At the center of it all was Pastor Daniel Cross, a man deeply respected by his congregation. His sermons brought people to tears, and his presence gave them comfort. But behind his role as a preacher, Daniel was struggling with loneliness. Daniel's marriage to Eleanor Cross was far from happy. Eleanor came from a wealthy and powerful family in Somerville. Her father owned many businesses, and her mother was the most important figure at church events. Eleanor followed in their footsteps, caring more about social status than real connections. She loved throwing fancy parties and making sure people talked about the Cross family. But with Daniel, her love was distant and cold. For years, Daniel tried to fix their marriage, but Eleanor was not interested. She wanted to maintain the perfect image of a preacher's wife. As long as Daniel played his role, she was satisfied. But inside, he felt empty. He longed for someone who truly saw him, not just as a pastor, but as a man. Then, he met Cassandra Walker. Cassie, as people called her, was facing her own struggles. She had married Tom Walker, a serious and emotionally distant man, not out of love but because she had no other choice. Tom, a mechanic, spent more time at his garage than at home. Their marriage felt like an empty house, functional but without warmth. At 34, Cassie felt her life had passed her by. She had no children, no excitement, and no real purpose. One evening in March 2012, at a church fundraiser, Cassie caught Daniel's eye. She wore a simple dress that suited her well, and her laughter filled the room. But beneath her charm was a deep sadness, one that Daniel recognized because he felt it too. That night, Cassie approached Daniel with a plate of homemade cornbread and a smile that lingered a little too long. Their conversation started with small talk about the church's roof repairs, but soon turned personal. Cassie admitted she often felt like she did not belong in Somerville. Daniel listened closely, his expression softening. In that moment, he felt understood, something Eleanor had not given him in years. As weeks passed, they found themselves drawn to each other. It began with simple smiles during Bible study. Cassie started staying behind after church events, finding reasons to help Daniel clean or organize. Their moments together carried an unspoken tension, a connection growing between them. By May 2012, their stolen glances had turned into something more. They arranged to meet in private. At first, it was at Cassie's home when Tom worked late. Later, they met at a small motel on the edge of town. These moments felt thrilling and dangerous. Cassie found in Daniel the emotional bond she had longed for. Daniel, in turn, felt alive in a way he had not in years. Their affair quickly became an obsession. Cassie became careless, leaving traces of her perfume on Daniel's shirt and lipstick marks on his collar. Daniel tried to resist, praying for strength each night, but his willpower was slipping. By September 2012, Cassie started feeling different. She felt sick often, always tired, and had a strange heaviness in her body. A visit to the local clinic confirmed what she already suspected: she was pregnant. The news brought both fear and excitement. During one of their secret meetings at the motel, she told Daniel. The moment she spoke the words, panic spread across his face. For Cassie, this baby was a new beginning, a chance to leave behind the small, suffocating town of Somerville. She imagined a fresh start with Daniel, raising their child far from the judgmental eyes of the community. But for Daniel, this was a disaster. He already struggled with guilt over the affair, and now the thought of a child threatened to destroy everything he had built. He could not abandon his congregation, and he could not face Eleanor. Cassie begged him to see the life they could have together. She spoke about a future free from pretense, where they could finally be happy. Daniel listened, but his fear held him back. He told her he needed time to think, though deep inside, he felt frozen, unable to act. What they did not know was that Eleanor had started to grow suspicious. She noticed Daniel's late nights, his distracted mind, the way he seemed distant even when he was home. Eleanor was not the kind of woman who accepted betrayal. Her marriage to Daniel was not just about love, it was about status, power, and keeping up appearances. If a scandal broke, her perfect image would shatter, and she would not let that happen. Determined to find out the truth, she began watching Daniel closely. One evening in early October, after Bible study, she followed him, staying just far enough behind so he would not notice. When she saw him enter a motel where Cassie was waiting, her worst fears were confirmed. To Eleanor, this was more than just an affair, it was an attack on everything she had worked for. If the town found out, her reputation would be ruined. Her family's name, her standing in the church, everything would be destroyed. For weeks, she said nothing, quietly plotting her next move. Then, one afternoon, while organizing donations at the church, she overheard Cassie speaking to a friend. Cassie mentioned her pregnancy, though she never named the father. But Eleanor did not need to hear her name. She knew. That moment was the breaking point. This was no longer just about an unfaithful husband. Cassie was carrying Daniel's child. The thought filled Eleanor with rage, but she did not lash out. Instead, her anger turned cold and calculated. She would not simply confront Cassie. She would make sure that Cassie and her unborn child would never be a threat to her life again. On a stormy night in mid-October 2012, Eleanor sat in the dim glow of her living room, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. Rain pounded against the windows, matching the storm inside her mind. The betrayal, the pregnancy, the humiliation, it all played over and over in her head. For Eleanor, this was not just jealousy. It was survival. If the truth came out, she would lose everything. Her marriage to Daniel had protected her, given her power in a town where image was everything. Now, Cassie threatened to destroy it all. Eleanor knew she could not reason with Daniel. He was weak, easily swayed by emotion. Cassie, however, was another story. In Eleanor's eyes, Cassie was reckless and selfish, a woman who had no place in her world. The fact that she carried Daniel's child was the ultimate insult, proof that Cassie had won in a way Eleanor never could. And Eleanor could not let that happen. On the evening of October 17, 2012, she made her final decision. Eleanor reached out to Cassie, pretending she wanted a private conversation to make peace. She played on Cassie's emotions, making it seem like an opportunity to talk things through. Cassie, perhaps too trusting, agreed to meet. Eleanor carefully chose the location, an old barn on the outskirts of Somerville, a place where no one would disturb them. As rain poured down, Eleanor arrived first, carrying an umbrella and a heavy candlestick hidden in her bag. She waited, her mind racing. When she saw Cassie step out of her car, soaked from the rain but determined, a surge of hatred filled her. Inside the barn, the confrontation began. Eleanor wasted no time accusing Cassie of destroying her marriage and ruining her life. Cassie did not back down. She admitted to the affair and revealed her pregnancy, hoping Eleanor would face the truth. But instead of calming her, the confession acted like fuel on a fire. Eleanor snapped. Her vision blurred with rage as they argued. Cassie still believed there was some kindness in Eleanor and tried to reason with her. But Eleanor was not listening. She saw only a threat that needed to be removed. The argument turned into a struggle. Cassie tried to defend herself as Eleanor's anger grew. In the heat of the moment, Eleanor pulled out the candlestick and swung it with all her strength. It struck Cassie on the side of her head. The force of the blow sent Cassie crashing to the ground. Blood pooled beneath her. Eleanor froze, staring at what she had done. Then, in panic, she dropped the candlestick and ran, leaving Cassie's lifeless body behind. The next morning, October 18, 2012, the rain had stopped, but an eerie silence hung over Somerville. A local farmer, Henry Mathus, was checking on his livestock near the old barn when he noticed something strange. The barn door was slightly open, moving with the wind. Curious, he stepped inside and immediately recoiled at the sight before him. Cassie's body lay on the cold, damp floor. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. Blood had dried in a dark pool around her head. Nearby, the candlestick rested, still stained with blood. Horrified, Henry ran back to his truck and called the police. By 9 a.m., investigators had swarmed the barn. Detective Lauren Martinez, known for her sharp instincts, arrived at the scene. She examined the area carefully, noting the brutality of the attack. The blow to Cassie's head was strong and deliberate. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had been caught off guard. The investigators worked methodically, collecting evidence and documenting everything. They bagged the candlestick, noting the fingerprints on its surface, and photographed the blood patterns around Cassie's body. Detective Martinez could not shake the feeling that this was not a random crime. The attack felt personal, driven by anger and betrayal. By October 20, 2012, police had started questioning those closest to Cassie. The first person they brought in was her husband, Tom Walker. Tom's reaction to his wife's death was unusual. He seemed detached, as if he had already accepted the loss long before. He admitted their marriage had been strained for years and even revealed that he knew about Cassie's affair. Tom claimed he did not care enough to act on Cassie's affair. Detective Martinez found his lack of emotion unsettling, but after careful observation, she believed his reaction came from resignation rather than guilt. With little evidence connecting him to the crime, investigators started exploring other possibilities. On October 24, 2012, they made a breakthrough. A search of Cassie's belongings uncovered a hidden collection of love letters exchanged between her and Pastor Daniel. The letters were detailed, describing their affair and Cassie's hopes for a future with him. Detective Martinez immediately brought Daniel in for questioning. Overcome with guilt, he admitted to the affair but firmly denied any involvement in Cassie's death. He spoke of his struggles with faith, his failing marriage, and the burden of betraying his congregation. His confession sent shockwaves through Somerville. The town's beloved pastor was now at the center of a scandal that threatened to tear the community apart. As the investigation continued, suspicion turned toward Eleanor. Witnesses recalled her increasingly unpredictable behavior in the weeks before Cassie's death. While she remained composed in public, those close to her noticed cracks in her carefully controlled image. The case took a decisive turn on November 1, 2012. Investigators executed a search warrant at the Cross estate and found a blood-stained scarf hidden in Eleanor's closet. The fibers on the scarf matched those from the crime scene, and forensic testing confirmed that the blood was Cassie's. The evidence was undeniable. Combined with her clear motive and erratic behavior, everything pointed to Eleanor as the killer. On the morning of November 15, 2012, police arrived at the Cross residence to arrest her. She was hosting a brunch for the church's women's group, one final attempt to maintain her perfect image. As officers led her away in handcuffs, the room fell silent. The women who had once admired her grace and strength now stared in shock. Eleanor kept her composure, but her eyes betrayed her fear. The people of Somerville were stunned. Their ideal preacher's wife was now the prime suspect in a murder case. Everything they believed about their town and its leaders was falling apart. Eleanor's arrest was only the beginning. The town now had to face the truth hiding in plain sight. The trial began in March 2013 at the county courthouse in Somerville. The town had never seen anything like it. News of the case spread far beyond the county, drawing reporters, curious spectators, and legal experts from neighboring areas. Every day, the courtroom was packed. Community members filled the seats, many of them former admirers of Eleanor. The tension in the air was heavy, as people watched the woman they once respected fight for her freedom. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Lisa Thompson, a determined and experienced lawyer. From the start, she made it clear that Eleanor was not a woman who had acted out of momentary rage. She was cold, calculating, and willing to kill to protect her image. Thompson presented the evidence found in Eleanor's home, the blood-stained scarf, witness testimonies, and the details of her behavior leading up to the murder. She built a story of control, jealousy, and premeditation. She reminded the jury that Eleanor's crime was not a result of passion but a deliberate act to remove a threat from her life. The defense, led by well-known attorney Charles Grant, faced a difficult challenge. He argued that Eleanor had acted in a moment of emotional distress, pushed over the edge by her husband's betrayal and the shame of Cassie's pregnancy. Eleanor's defense attorney, Charles Grant, argued that her actions resulted from a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by rage, not premeditation. He urged the jury to consider the emotional toll she had endured in the months leading up to the murder. Throughout the trial, the emotional strain on all involved became evident. Pastor Daniel Cross, once the town's moral guide, emerged as a key witness. He openly admitted to his affair with Cassie, describing how their shared loneliness evolved into a relationship he deeply regretted. Daniel portrayed Eleanor as someone obsessed with appearances, prioritizing her public image over their marriage. He spoke of her cold demeanor, which had driven him into despair. Despite revealing these painful truths, Daniel expressed profound remorse for his role in the tragedy, his voice trembling as he recounted how guilt had led him to resign from the church. The courtroom remained silent during his testimony, with only Eleanor's sharp breaths breaking the stillness. She sat at the defense table, her face impassive, though her eyes occasionally revealed flashes of emotion, perhaps anger or shame. Throughout the trial, Eleanor maintained her innocence, showing no remorse for what had transpired. To some, her cold demeanor reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of her as capable of murder. Witnesses, including neighbors and church members, testified about Eleanor's behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder. They described her as increasingly erratic, a stark contrast to the polished and composed woman they thought they knew. Some recalled overhearing her complain about Cassie, her words filled with disdain and fury. A pivotal moment in the trial occurred when the prosecution presented photographs from the crime scene. The gruesome images of Cassie's lifeless body and the blood-stained candlestick starkly reminded everyone of the violence that had occurred. Many in the courtroom turned away, unable to look, but Eleanor stared straight ahead, unflinching. The trial lasted nearly 3 weeks, with every detail meticulously examined and debated. By the time the jury began deliberations on March 18, 2013, the community of Somerville was deeply divided. Some believed Eleanor was a victim of her circumstances, while others saw her as a ruthless woman who would stop at nothing to protect her social standing. On March 20, 2013, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Eleanor Cross was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Cassie's few remaining family members wept quietly in the back row. Pastor Daniel lowered his head, a mixture of relief and sorrow etched on his face. Eleanor remained expressionless, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as the sentence was read: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the town of Somerville, the trial's conclusion marked the end of a long and painful chapter. However, the repercussions of Eleanor's actions, and those of everyone involved, would ripple through the community for years to come. The fallout from the trial was immediate and far-reaching. Pastor Daniel Cross, unable to reconcile his faith with his sins, resigned from his position at the church. On April 5, 2013, he delivered his final sermon to a somber congregation. Many in the church were torn between their anger at his betrayal and their sympathy for his evident remorse. Afterward, Daniel packed his belongings and left Somerville, retreating to a small town where he hoped to rebuild his life in anonymity. Tom Walker, Cassie's estranged husband, quietly sold their home and moved away from Somerville in May 2013. The town, once tight-knit and proud, struggled to come to terms with the scandal and tragedy that had unfolded within its community. The events served as a stark reminder of the hidden complexities and dark undercurrents that can exist beneath even the most idyllic surfaces. Tom Walker never attended the trial or made any public statements about Cassie's death. His silence left many wondering how much he had truly cared for her. Some whispered that he felt relieved to be free from their marriage, while others believed his departure was a sign of grief too deep to express. For Emily Cross, Eleanor, and Daniel's teenage daughter, the events were devastating. At just 14 years old, she had to face the truth about her mother's crime and her father's affair. In June 2013, she moved to Dallas to live with extended family, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. Her departure was the final blow to the Cross family, a once respected household now broken beyond repair. Somerville, once a town known for its close-knit community and southern charm, became a place haunted by scandal and loss. The church struggled to recover, its attendance dropping as members wrestled with the betrayal of their trusted pastor. The story of Eleanor's trial and Daniel's affair became a whispered warning, repeated in homes and diners for years. The town had learned a painful lesson: no matter how perfect things appear, darkness can hide beneath the surface. And when that darkness is unleashed, the consequences can be devastating. What pushes a person to kill just to protect their reputation? How do love and faith twist into betrayal and tragedy? The case of Somerville serves as a reminder that behind closed doors, even those who seem righteous can fall to their darkest sins. Janae Gagnier was born in 1987 in Los Angeles to Mark and Janetta Gagnier. Her parents came from a strict military background, where discipline and structure were a part of everyday life. After serving in the armed forces, they decided to leave that world behind and focus on building a business. Their dream was to open a restaurant, and over time, it became their life's work. Janae was the eldest of 3 sisters, and she shared a strong bond with them. Her upbringing was structured but not overly strict. Her parents believed in discipline, but they also encouraged independence and personal ambition. From an early age, Janae showed signs of an entrepreneurial mindset. At just 12 years old, she started her first business, braiding hair in her family's garage. What began as a small setup for friends and classmates quickly grew as word spread throughout the neighborhood. Soon, women lined up in the evenings to get their hair done by her. This small business gave her a sense of financial independence, something she took great pride in. Her childhood, however, took a difficult turn when she turned 14. Her parents decided to separate, and the divorce was far from peaceful. The conflicts between them created an emotionally tense environment that affected her deeply. The situation worsened when her father moved to Texas, leaving her and her sisters behind in Los Angeles. This sudden change created a divide in her family and left her feeling abandoned. She began struggling in school, her once outgoing nature turned withdrawn, and her relationship with her mother became strained. What her parents saw as typical teenage rebellion was, in reality, her way of coping with the collapse of the family she once knew. After finishing high school, Janae enrolled in college with plans to become a dental assistant. She saw it as a stable career that would provide financial security, but within a few months, she realized it was not the right fit. The coursework felt dull, and the idea of working in the field for the rest of her life did not excite her. Despite her parents' disappointment, she made the difficult decision to drop out and look for a new direction. Around this time, she met a man who promised her a fresh start. He convinced her to move to Las Vegas, assuring her that the city was filled with opportunities. Excited by the idea of something new, she packed her bags and left California behind. However, starting over was not as easy as she had imagined. Without a college degree or job experience, she struggled to find work that paid well. Most of the available jobs offered low wages and long hours, making it difficult to support herself. Through acquaintances, she learned about high-paying opportunities in the nightclub industry. At first, she was hesitant. It was a world she knew little about, and she was unsure if she would fit in. But financial pressure pushed her to give it a try. Her first few shifts were overwhelming, but she quickly realized that the earnings were far better than any other job she could get. Within weeks, she was making around $5,000 a week, enough to live comfortably and start saving for the future. As she became more familiar with the industry, she saw how women used their appearances and personalities to build connections with wealthy clients, celebrities, and business figures. She understood that standing out was the key to success, so she created a bold and unforgettable persona. She became Mercedes Moore, a name that commanded attention and set her apart from the crowd. While working in exclusive clubs, she noticed the growing power of social media. She started posting regularly on Instagram, showing glimpses of her luxurious lifestyle, and quickly gained attention. Wealthy individuals and influencers began following her, boosting her online presence. She used networking opportunities to appear in the posts of well-known figures, which helped her account grow even more. Within a short time, her follower count skyrocketed, reaching 3 million. She was no longer just another woman in the nightlife industry, she had become a social media personality with a massive audience. As Mercedes Moore's online presence continued to grow, she realized that relying on club work was not a long-term solution. She had built a brand around her image, and there were now millions of people following her every move. She saw how other influencers were using their social media fame to generate income in different ways, and she began looking for ways to take full control of her earnings. She no longer wanted to depend on late-night shifts or club promoters to make money. That was when she discovered OnlyFans, a platform that allowed content creators to earn through paid subscriptions. She saw how others were making significant income from exclusive content, and she decided to give it a try. With her already massive following, her page quickly gained thousands of subscribers. Within a few months, she was making more than she ever had before. Financial stability allowed her to leave the nightclub industry for good and focus entirely on her online brand. Despite her success, her relationship with her family remained tense. Her parents had always wanted her to take a more traditional career path, and they struggled to accept the choices she had made. They saw her new career as unstable and controversial, but Mercedes stood firm in her decisions. She had worked hard to build her independence, and she was happy with where she was in life. Over time, the arguments became less frequent, but the distance between them remained. With her growing success, she decided to move to Houston and settle into a gated community. She wanted privacy, security, and a place where she could finally feel safe. Her new home gave her the space to focus on personal projects, and she began planning to launch her own clothing line. Around this time, she also started a new relationship with a man who was not in the entertainment industry. Unlike her past experiences, this relationship was private and away from media attention. She seemed to have reached the peak of her success, financially independent, personally fulfilled, and in control of her future. But what she did not realize was that fame had also attracted something far more dangerous. Among the millions who followed her, there were some who did not just admire her from a distance. Some saw her as more than an influencer. One of them believed he was meant to be with her, and he was willing to do anything to make that happen. As Mercedes Moore's social media following continued to grow, so did the attention she received. At first, it was flattering. People admired her lifestyle, commented on her photos, and engaged with her posts. But over time, something shifted. Among the millions who followed her, there were those who took their admiration too far. What had once been harmless fan engagement turned into an unsettling obsession. At first, the signs were subtle. Strangers left comments under her posts that felt a little too personal. Some claimed to know where she lived. Others mentioned seeing her in certain places, even though she had never publicly shared her location. She dismissed it at first, assuming it was just people trying to get her attention. But then the messages became more specific. People were not just guessing where she lived, they were posting her home address in the comments. She deleted these messages as quickly as she could, hoping to keep her location private. But the problem did not stop. Soon, the online harassment turned into something far more terrifying. Strangers started showing up at her house, ringing her doorbell at all hours. Some left gifts on her doorstep. Others waited outside, hoping for a chance to see her in person. At first, she told herself that these were isolated incidents, just a few obsessive fans who would eventually lose interest. But the unwanted visitors kept coming. The fear of being watched became overwhelming. She began to feel trapped in her own home, never knowing who might be outside. To protect herself, she stopped tagging her location in posts. She was careful not to show any identifying details in her photos. If she went out, she waited until she was back home before sharing pictures. She even started blurring small background elements to make sure no one could figure out where she was. But no matter how careful she was, it seemed like people still knew where to find her. The situation became so stressful that she decided to move to a gated community in Houston. She hoped that added security would give her peace of mind. The neighborhood had controlled entry, security cameras, and private access, which meant no one could just walk up to her house anymore. She finally felt like she could breathe again. But what she did not know was that someone had already found her. One of her followers had been watching her more closely than anyone else. He had studied every detail of her online presence, piecing together information that no one else had noticed. He was not just another fan. He believed he had a special connection with her, something that no one else could understand. And in his mind, the only thing left to do was meet her in person. Mercedes thought she had taken every precaution, but she had no idea that the nightmare was only just beginning. Kevin Accordo lived in Florida, far from the world of luxury and fame that Mercedes Moore had built for herself. To those around him, he seemed like an ordinary man. He had no criminal history, no history of violence, and nothing in his past suggested that he was dangerous. But behind closed doors, his mind was consumed by something no one else could see. He had become obsessed with a woman he had never met. Mercedes was not just an influencer to him. In his mind, she was someone special, someone he believed he had a connection with. He followed her every move online, studying every post, every caption, and every detail in her photos. He watched her stories, read the comments under her pictures, and paid close attention to the locations she visited. He convinced himself that he understood her in a way that no one else did. At first, his obsession was limited to watching from a distance. But over time, watching was no longer enough. He needed to be closer to her, to see her in real life, to prove that the bond he imagined was real. The problem was, Mercedes had taken great care to keep her personal life private. She never shared her exact location, and she rarely posted in real time. But Kevin was patient. He analyzed every post, looking for small details that could help him find her. Then, he found what he was looking for. In one of her pictures, there was a reflection of her front door. It was barely noticeable to most people, just a background detail. But to Kevin, it was the final clue he needed. He compared the image to online real estate listings and read through fan comments until he confirmed the name of her residential complex. That was all it took. Without hesitation, he packed his bags and got into his car. He drove thousands of miles from Florida to Texas, convinced that he was about to change both of their lives forever. To him, this was not a crime. This was destiny. Kevin Accordo arrived in Houston after days on the road. He had traveled across multiple states, driven through the night, and barely stopped to rest. None of that mattered to him. All he could think about was Mercedes Moore and the moment he would finally see her. The gated community where she lived was designed to keep people like him out, but he was determined. Security at the entrance made it difficult for outsiders to enter, but Kevin found a way in. Surveillance footage later showed him walking around the area, appearing to scout the neighborhood. Investigators believe he may have slipped in behind another resident's vehicle as they entered, avoiding detection. Another possibility was that he posed as a delivery driver, blending in just enough to pass unnoticed. However, he managed to get inside. One thing was clear, he had reached her home. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door and windows were intact, meaning he either convinced Mercedes to open the door or forced his way in once she was close enough. The exact moment of the attack is unknown, but what happened inside was brutal. Mercedes fought back. Evidence of a violent struggle was found throughout the house. Bruises on her arms and defensive wounds on her hands showed that she resisted as much as she could. But Kevin had the physical advantage. He was stronger, and once he overpowered her, there was no escape. Her cause of death was asphyxiation. He strangled her until she stopped breathing, refusing to let go. Most people would have fled after committing such a crime, but Kevin did not leave. Instead, he stayed inside her home for 3 days. For 72 hours, he lived in the space of the woman he had just killed. He ate food from her refrigerator, used her personal belongings, and moved through the rooms as if he belonged there. During those 3 days, he also left behind disturbing messages. Written in red lipstick across mirrors and walls, his words were a mix of regret, obsession, and anger. Some messages hinted at betrayal, suggesting that he believed Mercedes had wronged him in some way. One phrase suggested she was wearing another man's ring. Others were more erratic, the handwriting uneven and rushed, evidence of a deeply disturbed mind. For 3 days, no one knew what had happened. Mercedes' phone remained silent. Calls and messages went unanswered. From the outside, everything looked normal, but inside that house, the nightmare had already unfolded. Mercedes Moore had always been active on her phone. Whether it was texting friends, updating her social media, or calling family, she was never completely silent. So when days passed without a response, her family began to worry. Her father, Mark Gagnier, grew increasingly concerned. He had tried calling and messaging her multiple times, but there was no reply. At first, he assumed she might be busy or traveling, but something did not feel right. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, he decided to check on her in person. He drove to her house in Houston, hoping he was overreacting. But as soon as he arrived, his fears deepened. Her car was still parked in the garage, which meant she had not left the house. He rang the doorbell. No answer. He knocked louder, calling her name. Still, nothing. He tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Peering through the windows, he saw that the curtains were drawn. The house was silent, but something felt off. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and forced his way through the door. The moment the door swung open, a strong, overwhelming odor filled the air. It was thick, suffocating, and unmistakable. His stomach turned as the realization hit him. Something terrible had happened here. As he stepped inside, his eyes fell on the staircase. At the bottom, Mercedes' lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor. Her skin was pale, her clothing stained with dried blood. She was gone. For a moment, he could not move. He felt frozen, unable to process the scene in front of him. But then, he heard something upstairs. He looked up and saw movement on the second floor. At first, he thought it was his daughter. He wanted to believe she was still alive. But as he focused, he realized it was someone else. A man. Collapsed on the ground, barely breathing. Kevin Accordo was still alive, but just barely. He had stabbed himself in the chest, an apparent suicide attempt. Blood pooled around him, and his body trembled slightly. But within seconds, he went completely still. Mark ran up the stairs, but it was too late. Kevin took his last breath right in front of him. Investigators arrived minutes later and found disturbing writings covering the walls and mirrors. Scrawled in red lipstick, the messages made no sense, a mix of guilt, anger, and obsession. Whatever had been going through Kevin's mind in those final moments, one thing was clear: Mercedes never saw it coming. When investigators pieced together the events leading up to Mercedes Moore's death, they confirmed what her family had feared the most: she had never met Kevin Accordo before that night. There was no past connection, no private conversations, and no reason for him to believe they had any kind of relationship. He had been a delusional stalker who had followed her online, convinced himself they shared a special bond, and ultimately tracked her down in real life. There was no trial, no conviction, and no chance for justice. Kevin had taken his own life, leaving behind only cryptic messages and a shattered family. With him gone, there were no legal proceedings, no answers to the lingering questions, and no closure for those who had lost her. As soon as the news broke, the public reaction was immediate. Mercedes' case sparked a national conversation about the dangers of social media fame and the risks that influencers face. Many questioned how someone could become so obsessed with a person they had never met, while others pointed out how easy it had been for Kevin to find her. But just as quickly as the truth came out, misinformation flooded the internet. Rumors spread across social media, with people speculating about the cause of her death. Some falsely claimed she had died from a drug overdose, while others suggested it was a result of COVID-19. A more bizarre theory alleged that her death had occurred during an intimate encounter gone wrong. Authorities had to step in and confirm the facts. Mercedes had not died of an overdose, illness, or any of the other false rumors. Her death was the result of something far more terrifying: a man who had turned his online obsession into real-life violence. The loss of Mercedes Moore left her family shattered. Her father, Mark Gagnier, could not escape the image of what he had seen that night. The moment he forced open the door, the unbearable smell, the sight of his daughter lying lifeless at the bottom of the stairs, it replayed in his mind over and over again. No parent should ever have to find their child that way, and yet, that was the reality he was forced to live with. Her younger sisters lost more than just a sibling; they lost their role model, their protector, and their guide. Mercedes had always been the one they looked up to, the person who made them believe they could achieve anything. Now, there was only emptiness where she had once been. Her mother, Janetta, struggled to cope with the grief. She could not understand how a stranger had taken her daughter away. How could someone who had never met Mercedes feel entitled to her life? The weight of those questions, questions that would never be answered, became impossible to bear. In the months following her death, Mark Gagnier decided to speak out. He wanted the world to know that what had happened to his daughter was not just a tragedy, it was a warning. He became an advocate for influencer safety, urging those who live their lives in the public eye to take extra precautions. Fame was no longer just about success, it was about survival. Mercedes' story remains one of the most chilling examples of social media obsession gone too far. What started as admiration turned into something deadly. She never knew her killer, but he had known everything about her. On May 4, 2018, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Drive remained undisturbed. Olivia Brooks stepped into the bedroom. She made a horrifying discovery: her husband Ethan Brooks was lying there, motionless. His body was unnaturally still, his skin pale and cold. A belt was wrapped tightly around his neck, his eyes fixed in a vacant, lifeless stare. The sight was haunting, and for a moment, Olivia could not breathe. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, her hand flying to her mouth to suppress the scream threatening to break free. She felt panicked and reached for her phone with unsteady hands, her fingers struggling to press the right buttons. Olivia's voice was barely audible, her breath shaky as she stammered, "My husband, he is not breathing. I think he is dead." The dispatcher immediately began asking questions, trying to keep her calm while gathering essential details. The minutes stretched endlessly as Olivia stood frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from the horrifying scene before her. Within moments, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. The paramedics arrived quickly, their expressions serious as they entered the bedroom. One of them stepped forward, checking Ethan for any signs of life, while another gently guided Olivia away, sensing her distress. "It is too late," one of the paramedics murmured under his breath. The confirmation sent a fresh wave of devastation crashing over Olivia. A strangled sob broke free as she clutched her chest, her knees buckling beneath her. The room felt suffocating, the weight of reality pressing down on her as the paramedics worked to secure the scene. Outside, the street remained eerily quiet, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded behind the closed doors of the Brooke residence. Ethan Brooke was a self-made millionaire and the chief executive officer of Brooke Technologies Incorporated. At 39 years old, he had built an empire that placed him among the most influential figures in the technology sector. His journey had started in Bedminster, New Jersey, where he spent his childhood and attended local schools. From an early age, he displayed a keen interest in computers, spending countless hours dismantling and reassembling hardware, eager to understand how things worked. His passion for technology led him to Stanford University, where he pursued a degree in computer science. After graduation, Ethan co-founded his first company with a former classmate, developing software solutions for small businesses. Within a few years, his ambitions grew, and he launched Brooke Technologies Incorporated. His company quickly gained recognition after introducing a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform that transformed the industry. The platform's advanced capabilities caught the attention of investors, major corporations, and media outlets, propelling Ethan to widespread recognition. As Brooke Technologies flourished, so did Ethan's public presence. He became a sought-after speaker at global technology conferences, sharing insights on innovation and entrepreneurship. His name frequently appeared in leading business magazines, and he was a guest on major news networks, discussing the future of artificial intelligence. During one such conference, Ethan met Olivia, an event planner responsible for organizing the high-profile event where he was the keynote speaker. Their initial interaction was brief, but fate brought them together again at a charity gala weeks later. Their connection was immediate, and their relationship quickly blossomed into a whirlwind romance. Their wedding was an extravagant affair, attended by leaders from both the technology and social elite. Together, they were admired as a formidable power couple. Ethan had been eagerly anticipating his 40th birthday celebration, which Olivia was meticulously planning. The grand event was set to take place on a luxurious yacht overlooking the Manhattan skyline, but the celebration would never happen. Ethan's life had been tragically cut short just weeks before the milestone event. Detective Emily Rodriguez and her partner, Detective Michael Chen, arrived at the Brooke residence shortly after the paramedics confirmed Ethan Brooke's death. The two seasoned investigators stepped out of their vehicle, their sharp eyes scanning the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Drive. The street, typically peaceful, was now lined with onlookers whispering among themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. Inside the house, the scene was grim. The bedroom was in disarray, suggesting that something violent had taken place. Two coffee mugs sat on the floor, one of them bearing a faint trace of lipstick. A partially eaten packet of cookies lay nearby, its wrapper crumpled. A silk nightgown, draped over a bedside lamp, added to the unsettling atmosphere. The bed covers were tossed aside, and the sheets were untucked, as though there had been a struggle. Ethan Brooke's lifeless body remained on the bed, his exposed skin marked by bruises. A belt was wrapped tightly around his neck, leaving deep impressions in his flesh. His hands were slightly curled, and underneath his fingernails, investigators noticed what appeared to be skin or fibers, possible evidence of a struggle. Detective Rodriguez walked around the room, her gaze sharp and calculating. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing in the house appeared ransacked. This suggested that Ethan had either let his attacker inside willingly or had been in their company before the violence erupted. The forensic team moved quickly, working with precision. Luminol was sprayed across the room, revealing faint traces of bodily fluids on the carpet near the bed. Samples of hair and fibers were carefully collected from the bedding and surrounding area. Every potential piece of evidence was bagged and documented, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Detective Chin carefully lifted the belt from Ethan's neck, inspecting it closely before placing it into an evidence bag. "This could be our murder weapon," he murmured, handing it off to the forensic team for further analysis. Outside, the weight of the tragedy was beginning to settle over the neighborhood. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out, hesitant to step outside but unable to resist their curiosity. Some whispered to one another, speculating about what had happened inside the house. Others remained silent, shaken by the knowledge that something so horrific had occurred just doors away. The investigation was only beginning, but one thing was certain: this was no accident. The evidence suggested that Ethan Brooke had been murdered, and whoever was responsible had made sure to leave behind as few traces as possible. Olivia Brooks was the first person detectives called in for questioning. Less than 24 hours after discovering her husband's lifeless body, she sat inside the sterile walls of the police interrogation room. Her hands were clasped together on the metal table, her fingers intertwined tightly. Across from her, Detective Emily Rodriguez and Detective Michael Chen observed her closely, noting every movement, every hesitation. Olivia took a deep breath before speaking, her voice shaking slightly. She claimed that on the night of May 3rd, she had been working late at a venue, finalizing details for an upcoming wedding event. She insisted she had spent the entire evening there, only returning home later that night, long after Ethan had presumably gone to bed. Her words were confident, but her actions told a different story. She was eager, too eager, to establish her alibi, repeatedly emphasizing that she had no involvement in Ethan's death. She mentioned her emails, her phone records, and even the venue staff who could confirm her presence. The detectives exchanged a glance, recognizing the familiar signs of someone desperately trying to convince them of the truth. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward, keeping her tone neutral. "You must have been exhausted after working so late. Did anyone see you leave?" Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her head. "No, I left quietly. It was late, and I did not want to bother anyone." Detective Chen noted the way her hands fidgeted, her fingers pressing against each other as though trying to relieve tension. She avoided direct eye contact, her gaze shifting to the walls, the floor, anywhere but the detectives' faces. Her breathing was steady, but her voice held an underlying tremor that betrayed her nerves. Rodriguez folded her arms. "We will need to verify that." Olivia forced a nod, though her lips pressed into a tight line. As soon as she left the station, the detectives got to work. Surveillance footage from the event venue would confirm whether she had truly been there all night as she claimed. If there was any inconsistency in her story, they would find it. And if Olivia Brooks had something to hide, it would only be a matter of time before the truth surfaced. Detectives Rodriguez and Chin reviewed the surveillance footage from the event venue where Olivia claimed to have been working late. As they fast-forwarded through the hours of recorded video, one detail stood out: Olivia never appeared at the venue that evening. There was no record of her arriving or leaving. Confused, they widened their search and checked nearby locations. Their efforts led them to security footage from a hotel just a few blocks away. There, at approximately 4:30 p.m. on May 3rd, Olivia was seen checking into a room. She did not appear alone for long. An hour later, a man entered her hotel room. He wore a fedora and sunglasses, making it difficult to see his face clearly. He remained inside for several hours, and at around 3 a.m., he finally left. Just minutes after, Olivia stepped out, looking around cautiously before following him to the parking lot. The two shared a kiss before parting ways and driving off in separate directions. Detective Chen exhaled sharply. "So much for working late at the venue." Rodriguez nodded. "She was never there. She was with him all night." As they continued digging, another discovery raised further suspicion. Olivia had not only lied about her whereabouts, but she had also canceled all her scheduled work meetings for both May 3rd and May 4th, the same days surrounding Ethan's murder. The next step was to identify the mystery man. A closer analysis of the footage and a check through hotel records revealed his name: a 23-year-old fitness model and entrepreneur known online as the Muscle Lucas. Rodriguez pulled up his profile on social media. His page was filled with images of his chiseled physique, luxury cars, and cryptic motivational quotes. He had amassed a large following, particularly among older women, many of whom left adoring comments on his posts. Chen leaned back in his chair. If he was involved with Olivia, we need to find out just how deep this connection goes. With Olivia's alibi now completely shattered and a new suspect in the mix, the case was beginning to take a darker and more complex turn. The man identified as the Muscle Lucas was more than just a fitness coach. At 23 years old, he had built a massive social media following, branding himself as an entrepreneur, lifestyle coach, and physique model. His carefully curated online persona showcased a life of luxury, exotic cars, high-end vacations, designer clothes, and exclusive parties. His followers, primarily older women, flooded his posts with admiration, often referring to him as charming, irresistible, and dangerously seductive. However, beyond the surface, rumors surrounded Lucas's profession. He was suspected of offering more than just personal training sessions. His name had been whispered in exclusive social circles, allegedly maintaining a black book filled with wealthy, influential women who sought companionship, guidance, and something far more intimate than fitness coaching. Detective Rodriguez studied his profile carefully. "He does not just sell workout plans," she muttered. Chen scrolled through the comments section, where older women left flirtatious remarks beneath his photos. If what people say is true, his business model is unconventional. Their biggest question remained, what was his relationship with Olivia? Was she just another client, someone who had paid for his services, or was their connection something deeper? Olivia had gone to great lengths to keep their involvement hidden. She had checked into a hotel under a different name, she had lied about her whereabouts, and she had canceled all her work meetings during the time frame surrounding Ethan's murder. Lucas's sudden presence in Olivia's life raised several red flags. If he had nothing to do with the crime, why had Olivia been so secretive about him? And if he had something to gain, could he have been involved in orchestrating Ethan's death? Detectives Rodriguez and Chen knew that they had to move quickly. Lucas was not just a mysterious figure in Olivia's personal life, he was now a key suspect in the murder of Ethan Brooke. Lucas was brought into the police station for questioning. He walked into the interrogation room with an air of confidence, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He sat across from Detective Rodriguez and Detective Chen, his hands resting casually on the table. Unlike many suspects who fidgeted under pressure, Lucas did not seem nervous at all. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Do you know why you are here?" Lucas shrugged slightly. "I assume this is about Ethan Brooke." Chen studied him carefully. "You assume correctly. You were with Olivia Brooks the night before her husband was murdered." Lucas nodded. "Yes, I was. I never denied that. Olivia and I were involved. We were having an affair." Rodriguez kept her tone neutral. "Did Ethan know?" Lucas exhaled, shaking his head. "No. He had no idea. She told me she was unhappy, but she was not ready to leave him yet." The detectives exchanged a glance. Rodriguez tapped a folder on the table. "Where were you on the night of May 3rd, between 11 and 1 in the morning?" Lucas met her gaze without hesitation. "I was at a photo shoot. You can check with the photographer. I was there the whole time." The detectives did exactly that. They contacted the photographer, who confirmed that Lucas had been present for the shoot. His alibi checked out. But then, something unusual surfaced. The photographer casually mentioned that, during the session, Lucas had stepped away to take a phone call. The call lasted several minutes, and when he returned, his demeanor had shifted slightly, more focused, more intense. Rodriguez and Chen knew that phone call could be the missing link. If it was connected to Ethan's murder, then Lucas was far from innocent. Detectives Rodriguez and Chen obtained warrants to examine the phone records of both Olivia Brooks and Lucas. As they sifted through the data, something immediately caught their attention: a series of cryptic messages exchanged between the two in the days leading up to Ethan's murder. One particular message from Lucas to Olivia stood out. "I'll handle it. You'll be free soon." Rodriguez read the text aloud, her expression tightening. "Free from what?" Chen scrolled further, uncovering deleted messages that had been recovered using forensic software. These messages revealed a far more intimate relationship between Olivia and Lucas than they had initially let on. There were explicit exchanges, love declarations, and promises of a future together. Olivia had confided in Lucas about her unhappiness, and he had responded with assurances that the situation would be taken care of. But then, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Among Lucas's outgoing messages, detectives found that he had been sending Olivia's private photos to another number. The recipient was a man named Victor. Rodriguez frowned. Who the hell is Victor? Chen quickly traced the number through police databases. Within moments, the answer flashed across the screen. Victor was Ethan Brooks' secretary. The room fell silent for a beat. The discovery changed everything. Rodriguez exhaled sharply. Ethan's right-hand man was receiving explicit photos of his wife? Chen shook his head. This is not just an affair. This is something bigger. Wasting no time, the detectives had Victor brought in for questioning. They needed to know how deep his involvement went, and whether Ethan's murder had been part of something far more sinister than a simple crime of passion. Victor sat in the interrogation room, his fingers tapping nervously against the metal table. His demeanor was different from Lucas's. He was not confident. He was not composed. He was cornered. Detective Rodriguez placed a folder in front of him, flipping through pages of text messages, bank transactions, and call logs that painted a damning picture. She looked at him, her voice even. Let us start with the truth, Victor. Victor swallowed hard, his gaze shifting between Rodriguez and Chen. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke. I was blackmailing Olivia, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Chen leaned forward. With what? Victor hesitated, then sighed in defeat. The photos. The ones Lucas sent me. I told Olivia that if she did not pay me, I would send them to Ethan. Rodriguez's expression did not change. And what was your plan? Victor ran a hand through his hair. I figured I could milk them both, Olivia for money, Lucas for favors. I did not care about their affair. I just wanted leverage. Rodriguez tapped on the phone records. You and Lucas spoke on May 3rd. The night before Ethan died. You told him, time to initiate the plan. What plan, Victor? Victor looked away, his leg bouncing beneath the table. I told him it was time to scare Olivia. Push her harder to pay up. He exhaled sharply. I never thought Ethan would end up dead. That was not supposed to happen. The detectives exchanged a glance. If Victor had not intended for Ethan to die, that meant there was only one person left who could have committed the murder, Olivia Brooks. Detectives Rodriguez and Chen began piecing together Olivia Brooks's movements on May 4th, the morning her husband was found dead. They traced her route using CCTV footage, hoping to uncover what she had done in the hours before the crime was discovered. The first significant discovery came from a shopping mall surveillance camera. At 9:45 a.m., Olivia was seen walking into a department store. The receipt from her purchase listed cleaning supplies and heavy-duty trash bags, an odd combination for someone who was supposedly unaware of her husband's impending death. Another camera captured her return home. Instead of immediately going inside, she sat in her parked car for several minutes. The detectives reviewed the footage closely. She appeared tense, unmoving, as though gathering her thoughts. Then, after some time, she finally stepped out and entered the house. Later that morning, a new piece of footage emerged. At around 11 a.m., Olivia ran frantically out of her house, looking distressed. She jumped into her car and sped away. Rodriguez tapped her pen against the screen. What was she running from? Meanwhile, the autopsy results were in. One detail stood out, a lipstick mark on Ethan's cheek, which matched Olivia's signature shade, a unique blend sold at an exclusive boutique. However, something did not add up. Despite the visible signs of struggle, Ethan's fingernails contained no DNA traces. If he had fought back, why was there no evidence of it? Detectives then turned their attention to Olivia's car. A search of the vehicle revealed fabric fibers caught in the door handle. The material was sent to the lab for analysis. If it matched anything from the crime scene, it could be the final nail in Olivia's case. With mounting evidence and inconsistencies in her story, Olivia Brooks was brought back for another round of interrogation. This time, the detectives were not going to let her walk out so easily. Olivia Brooks sat in the interrogation room for the second time, her expression carefully guarded. But this time, detectives Rodriguez and Chin were prepared to break her down. Rodriguez placed a series of photographs in front of her: CCTV footage from the mall, forensic reports, the lipstick match, and the fibers found in her car. She pointed at each piece of evidence, speaking firmly. "You lied about where you were. You bought cleaning supplies. You sat in your car, hesitating before going inside. Then, later, you ran out in a panic. Your lipstick was on Ethan's cheek, and yet, he has no DNA under his fingernails. We know you were there when he died, Olivia. We just need you to admit it." Olivia's breathing grew uneven. She swallowed hard, her composure beginning to crack. "I never meant to kill him," she whispered. Rodriguez and Chin remained silent, letting her continue. Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she finally confessed. She admitted that Lucas had threatened to expose their affair to Ethan unless she complied with his demands. Panicked, she rushed home that night to delete any messages before Ethan could see them. But when she walked into the bedroom, Ethan was already on his phone. "I thought he was looking at the pictures," she choked out. "I tried to grab the phone, but he pushed me back. He was getting suspicious. I panicked." A struggle broke out. Olivia grabbed the belt from the nightstand and pulled it around Ethan's neck in desperation. She just wanted him to stop fighting her, to keep him from seeing the messages. But in the heat of the moment, she pressed too hard. When Ethan's body went limp, she realized too late what she had done. On May 6, 2018, Olivia Brooks was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began quickly, and the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: her digital trail, her purchases, the lack of forced entry, and her own confession. On May 15, 2018, Olivia was found guilty and sentenced to death. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's words echoed through the chamber. She was led away in handcuffs, her once glamorous life now reduced to a tragic downfall. News of Olivia Brooks's guilty verdict spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of public outrage and debate. Social media platforms were flooded with divided opinions. Some believed that Olivia had been a desperate woman manipulated by Lucas and blackmailed by Victor, while others saw her as a cold-blooded murderer who had taken her husband's life to protect her own secret. Many questioned whether her death sentence was justified, while others demanded swift execution, arguing that Ethan Brooke, a respected businessman and philanthropist, had lost his life in the most senseless and selfish way. Beyond the courtroom, Ethan's death left a deep void in the community. The charities he had once supported struggled to stay afloat without his generous contributions. His company, Brooke Technologies, faced leadership uncertainty, and some of his long-term projects came to a halt. The annual charity run he had founded to support underprivileged youth was now in jeopardy, and the local food bank, where he had been a major donor, worried about funding. Olivia Brooks's execution was scheduled for June 2, 2018. As the day arrived, the public watched, some with anger, others with sorrow. News outlets covered every moment, recounting her fall from grace, from a privileged wife of a millionaire to a convicted murderer facing the ultimate penalty. It was a tragic tale of greed, desperation, and deadly secrets, one that left a trail of ruined lives and a shattered legacy. In February 2022, in Crestwood, life appeared ideal for the Davis family. Sarah Davis was a dedicated mother of two and a traditional housewife. Her husband, Matt Davis, worked long hours as an accountant at a local firm. To outsiders, their marriage looked strong and admirable. However, beneath the surface, Sarah was living a secret life. Matt had no idea that Sarah was having multiple affairs. She craved excitement, something she felt was missing from their steady and predictable marriage. Over the years, these encounters became more frequent and riskier. She met her lovers in motels, at private parties, and even in their home when Matt was away on business trips. She was always cautious, covering her tracks, but the thrill of each new affair kept her going. On a cold February evening, Matt arrived home earlier than expected. He was feeling unwell due to the flu and wanted to surprise Sarah before getting some rest. He quietly unlocked the front door, careful not to wake the children if they were asleep. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed the house was unusually silent. The only sound was a faint rustling coming from their bedroom upstairs. With each step he took up the stairs, his heartbeat grew louder. Something felt off. The silence in the house carried a strange sense of unease. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw that the bedroom door was slightly open. A dim light spilled into the hallway. Slowly, he pushed the door open just enough to see inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sarah was in their bed with another man. The same bed they had shared for years. For a moment, Matt could not move. He stood frozen in the doorway, feeling as if the world had collapsed beneath him. His mind went blank as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Sarah was the first to see him. Her face turned pale, and she gasped. In a panic, she pushed the man away and tried to speak, but her voice shook with fear. Matt could see her lips moving, but he could not hear the words. It felt like he was outside his own body, watching everything from a distance, as if it were happening to someone else. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Sarah called out to him, but he did not stop. He had no idea where he was going. He only knew he needed to get out of the house. As he stepped into the cold night air, he kept walking, hoping to escape the images burned into his mind. But no matter how far he went, the scene played over and over again in his head. In the days that followed, Matt was lost in a blur of emotions. He could not sleep. He could not eat. All he could think about was Sarah's betrayal. His mind was filled with questions. He needed answers. When Sarah was not looking, he began searching through her phone, reading her emails, and looking into every part of her life that he could access. What he found was worse than he had imagined. Sarah had been living this secret life for years. There was not just one man. There were many. The affairs had been going on for much longer than Matt wanted to believe. Every piece of evidence he found felt like another wound. Every text message, every hidden email, and every secret meeting revealed a side of Sarah he had never known. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had built a life with, had been living a lie. Matt's discovery shattered him. The love he once felt for Sarah twisted into something dark. He could not stop thinking about her betrayal, not just with one man, but with several. The pain consumed him. Sleep was impossible, food had no taste, and his thoughts became an endless loop of anger and resentment. One thought began to take over everything else: revenge. He could not simply move on. He could not let the men who had taken his life from him walk away without consequences. The more he thought about it, the more his anger grew. He wanted them to suffer, to feel the same pain that had taken over his life. On March 3, 2022, Matt decided it was time to act. He had learned the name of one of Sarah's lovers, a local instructor named Derek. For days, he had studied Derek's routine. He knew exactly where and when to find him. That evening, Matt parked his car near Derek's apartment. He waited in the darkness, his rage building with every passing moment. The street was quiet, the night cold and still. When Derek finally appeared, Matt's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Derek had no idea what was coming. He was just another man living his life, unaware of the storm about to hit him. As he approached the entrance to his building, Matt stepped out of the shadows. Derek looked up, surprised to see him. Before Derek could speak, Matt confronted him. His anger poured out as he demanded answers. He wanted to know every detail, every moment Derek had shared with Sarah. Derek was caught off guard. He was confused, defensive. But Matt was not listening. The confrontation quickly grew heated. When Derek tried to walk away, something inside Matt snapped. Without thinking, he grabbed the gym towel slung over Derek's shoulder. In one swift motion, he wrapped it around Derek's neck and pulled. The rage that had been boiling inside him exploded. Derek struggled, his hands clawing at the towel, trying to break free. But Matt's grip only tightened. His pain, his anger, everything he had held inside for so long was being released in this one moment. Derek's movements grew weaker. His gasps turned into silence. Then, his body went limp. Matt stood there, breathing heavily. He looked down at Derek's lifeless form. The rage was gone, replaced by emptiness. He let go of the towel and stepped back. His mind raced. He had crossed a line, one he could never go back from. But instead of guilt, Matt felt something else. Power. Killing Derek had not satisfied him. If anything, it had only made the anger stronger. One was not enough. He needed to finish what he had started. Over the next week, Matt hunted down 2 more men. Both had been involved with Sarah. and both suffered the same fate. Each murder became more violent as Matt's rage deepened and his grip on reality faded. On March 6, 2022, a neighbor found Derek's body. The neighbor became concerned when Derek did not show up for his usual morning run. He knocked on Derek's door, but there was no response. When he found the door unlocked, he stepped inside and discovered the lifeless body. The police arrived quickly and examined the scene. There were few clues. Derek's apartment was neat, with no clear signs of a struggle. The only possible evidence was the towel Matt had used, but it carried no fingerprints. The detectives were puzzled. There was no motive, no suspect, and nothing to point them in the right direction. 2 days later, on March 8, 2022, another body was found. This time, it was a businessman murdered in a motel room. The motel staff found him after he failed to check out on time. His body was on the bed, showing clear signs of a violent attack. There were bruises, deep cuts, and clear evidence of a struggle. The police were called once again. This crime scene was different. Unlike Derek's apartment, there were signs of a fight. But just like before, there was no clear evidence to identify the killer. The police found some fibers and hair, but they were not enough to lead to a suspect. There were no witnesses, and the motel's security cameras were not working that night. The investigation was becoming more difficult. As detectives examined the cases, they noticed similarities. Both victims were men, and both were murdered within days of each other. This made them look deeper into their backgrounds. They searched for any possible connection between the two. What they found changed everything. Both men had been romantically involved with Sarah Davis. Derek had been seeing her for a few months, while the businessman had been involved with her for nearly a year. This discovery led detectives to focus on Sarah and her husband, Matt. Sarah was called in for questioning. She appeared shocked and upset when asked about the murders. She claimed to know nothing about why her past lovers had been targeted. She told detectives that she had ended her affairs and was trying to fix her marriage. Her story sounded believable, and with no evidence against her, the police had no reason to hold her. The detectives then turned their attention to Matt. When questioned, he appeared sad and distant, still struggling with the pain of Sarah's betrayal. His alibis for the nights of the murders checked out, and there was no direct evidence linking him to the crimes. The case had reached a dead end. The detectives had their suspicions, but with no concrete proof, they could not move forward. They continued to watch both Matt and Sarah, hoping for a break in the case, but nothing new emerged. Without witnesses or evidence, the investigation stalled. By mid-March, Matt was barely holding onto his sanity. The guilt, rage, and darkness that had taken over his life were now controlling him. He had already taken lives, yet it was not enough. His anger only grew stronger. But there was still one more man. This man was not just another fling. He was a wealthy real estate agent, someone who had been involved with Sarah for over a year. In Matt's eyes, this man was the real reason for his pain. One night, Matt decided it was time to finish what he had started. He followed the man through the city, his mind focused on what he was about to do. The man, completely unaware of the danger, drove to a quiet spot on the outskirts of town, a place he often visited to clear his thoughts. Matt watched from a distance, waiting for the right moment. His heart pounded, and his hands trembled, but he was determined. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the man stepped out of his car, Matt moved in. His footsteps felt heavy, weighed down by everything he had done. The darkness around them seemed to close in. He could hear his own breath, loud and uneven. He approached, his mind a storm of rage, fear, and despair. But just as he was about to attack, something inside him broke. The anger that had consumed him for weeks suddenly vanished, leaving behind only guilt and horror. The weight of his actions crashed down on him. Instead of striking, Matt dropped to his knees, his entire body shaking. His breath came in gasps as he spoke, the words pouring out in a desperate, frantic confession. He told the man everything. About Sarah's affairs. About Derek. About how he had lost control of his life. At first, the man was confused. Then, as the truth became clear, fear filled his eyes. He had no idea who Matt was or why he was telling him these things, but he could see the danger in his trembling hands and hear the madness in his voice. As Matt continued to ramble, the man slowly backed away. Then, in a sudden burst of panic, he turned and ran. His heart pounded as he rushed to his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his phone. He dialed the police and sped away. When officers arrived, they found Matt still there, sitting on the ground, covered in blood, mumbling to himself. He did not resist when they handcuffed him. He did not speak as they led him to the police car. The fire that had once driven him was gone, replaced by emptiness. But the case was far from over. As investigators searched the Owens home, they uncovered something shocking. Sarah had known about Matt's actions all along. Text messages between Sarah and one of her lovers revealed that she had been manipulating Matt, feeding his paranoia, and subtly encouraging his violent behavior. It became clear that she had been controlling him from the beginning, using his love and jealousy to get rid of the men she no longer wanted. Detectives quickly pieced together the timeline of Matt's descent into madness. On March 10, 2022, they brought Sarah in for questioning. At first, she played the role of the grieving wife, pretending to be horrified by Matt's actions. But as the evidence against her grew, her lies began to unravel. They found text messages where she had planted seeds of doubt in Matt's mind. "Matt, do you ever feel like people are laughing at you behind your back?" She made him question everything, stirring his insecurity. "I heard noises last night when you were gone. It scared me so much." These messages made him more paranoid and angrier. Then, in the attic, detectives found Sarah's diary. Inside, she had written about her affairs in detail, describing the excitement she felt living her secret life. But her words also revealed something darker, her growing hatred for Matt. "Matt is so boring," she wrote. "I wish he would just disappear." The most chilling entries, however, showed just how much she had planned everything. Sarah's diary revealed just how deeply she had planned everything. "If I push him just right, he will snap. He will get rid of my problems for me." When Matt was arrested, he was in shock. He could not believe what he had done, and even worse, he could not believe that Sarah had known all along. He had truly loved her, and realizing that she had used that love to turn him into a monster was unbearable. In the end, he confessed everything to the police, hoping for some kind of peace. On March 15, 2022, Matt was charged with 3 counts of murder. His defense attorney argued that Sarah's betrayal and manipulation had driven him to insanity. The court reviewed the evidence, the text messages, the diary, the phone records. The evidence against Sarah was overwhelming. But the prosecution, led by a sharp and determined district attorney, painted a different picture. They argued that Matt had allowed his jealousy to take control, leading him down a dark path of brutal killings. The trial began in early January 2023. Every day, the courtroom was packed. People from Crestwood and beyond came to watch the drama unfold. The media covered the case heavily, turning it into a national spectacle. The prosecution started strong. They presented Sarah's diary, which detailed her affairs, her manipulation, and her growing hatred for Matt. They also used forensic evidence to link Matt to each crime scene. Fingerprints, DNA, and other traces proved his presence. But the most shocking part was Sarah's role in everything. The prosecution revealed text messages between Sarah and her lovers. These messages showed how she had been manipulating Matt, pushing him toward violence. She had used his love and jealousy against him, knowing exactly how he would react. The evidence painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had used Matt as a pawn in her own twisted game. The most dramatic moment came when Matt took the stand. His testimony was emotional and heartbreaking. He spoke about his love for Sarah and how discovering her betrayal had shattered him. He described the moment he found out about the affairs, the rage that consumed him, and how he lost control. He broke down as he talked about his guilt over the murders. The courtroom was silent as everyone listened, captivated by his tragic story. Sarah's defense tried to portray her as a victim too. They claimed she had never directly asked Matt to kill anyone. They argued that she was just a lonely woman in a failing marriage, looking for excitement. But the evidence against her was too strong. The diary entries and text messages revealed a clear pattern of manipulation. Sarah's demeanor on the stand only made things worse. She showed little emotion. Her cold and calculating nature was on full display. The jury saw her for who she truly was. In the end, the verdict was clear. The jury found Matt guilty on all counts. They believed he had been manipulated, but he had still committed the murders. On April 25, 2023, Matt was sentenced to death. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Matt's family wept, but he stood motionless, broken and resigned. Sarah was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge stated that while she had not physically killed anyone, her actions had directly led to the deaths of 3 men. Sarah showed little emotion as she was led away. She maintained her cold, detached demeanor until the very end. As everything unfolded, one question remained: had Sarah turned Matt into a monster, or had he always been one? Some speculated that this might not have been Matt's first murder. His precision, his calmness, and his determination seemed too perfect for a novice. But then again, we are left wondering, could Matt have chosen a different path? Could he have handled his wife's betrayal without resorting to murder? If Sarah had not manipulated him, would he have stopped after the first killing? One police officer even remarked that it might have been better if Matt had confronted Sarah directly instead of taking the lives of men who were unaware of the depth of her deception. But now, it is too late. Matt is gone. No life sentence, only death. All because of a woman who knew exactly how to push him over the edge. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss any of our true crime stories. We have many cases of people whose obsessions led to their downfall. Be sure to check them out.
This is story of 2 sisters, Mia and Anna Reed. Their lives had been connected through a mix of love, jealousy, and hidden anger since they were young. Anna, the older sister, was always seen as the favorite. She was beautiful, smart, and married to Jake Miller, a successful and charming architect. People in the town of Mill Haven admired their marriage. It looked perfect, something many hoped to have one day. Mia and Anna came from a simple family. Their father worked as a fisherman, and their mother was a school teacher. From a young age, it was clear that the sisters were very different. Anna was calm and kind. She did well in school, her teachers liked her, and she moved through life easily. Her future seemed clear. She would go to college, get a good job, and start a family with a nice man. Mia was different. She had a strong and wild energy from the time she could walk. She was just as smart as her sister, but people noticed her more for her bold attitude. She often broke rules and liked to test limits that as they grew older, their differences became even clearer. Anna chose to study education, just like their mother. Mia kept changing her college major, unsure of what she really wanted. During this time, people started to notice how Mia could twist situations. She was clever and knew how to get what she wanted by using her words and charm. That Mia's love life was full of drama. Her relationships were fast and exciting in the beginning, but they never lasted long. She often left behind hurt feelings and angry ex-boyfriends. People in Mill Haven began to see her as the troubled one in the family. Anna finished college and came back to Mill Haven. Soon after, she met Jake Miller. He had moved to the town to work on fixing the old lighthouse. He fell in love with the town's peaceful beauty and with Anna. They quickly fell in love and had a big, beautiful wedding. Everyone in town talked about it for months. Jake's work kept going well. He and Anna moved into a lovely house near the ocean. Their life looked perfect, like something out of a storybook. But things were not as perfect as they seemed. Anna, who always tried to do the right thing, started to feel empty. She had given up her own dreams of travel and adventure to live in Mill Haven. Deep down, she felt upset about everything she had given up for her marriage. Jake was also going through a hard time. His job was stressful, and the small town had high expectations. All of it started to wear him down. Jake loved Anna deeply, but there were times when he felt trapped by the image of perfection they were expected to keep. Their life looked perfect to others, but it was hard to keep it that way all the time. Into this fragile peace, Mia came back into their lives. She had spent years moving from city to city. Now she returned to Mill Haven, saying she wanted to reconnect with her roots. In truth, she was running from another broken relationship and heavy debts. She needed a place to stay, and she knew Anna would never say no. Anna, always kind and caring, welcomed Mia with open arms. She offered her a place to live until she could start fresh. But after Mia moved into the Blunt household, things slowly began to change. The way the three of them interacted started to shift in quiet but powerful ways. A storm was beginning to build, one that would shake Mill Haven and change their lives forever. At first, Mia's return seemed good for Anna and Jake. They laughed more, shared old memories, and enjoyed each other's company. The sisters grew close again, and Jake was the helpful husband and friendly brother-in-law. But with time, Mia's real intentions began to show. She started to look at Jake for too long. Her touches became more frequent and clear. She found reasons to be near him, asking for help with her car, advice on job applications, or simply walking into the kitchen late at night when Anna had already gone to bed. Jake did not notice at first. He thought she was just being friendly. But slowly, he began to feel drawn to her. Anna was calm and steady. Mia was full of energy and surprise. She listened closely when Jake talked about his work. She asked thoughtful questions and made him feel seen. In those moments, Jake felt something he had not felt in a long time. Jake was a man with strong values. He loved his wife and the life they had built. He tried to stay away from Mia. He worked longer hours, took on new projects, and spent less time at home. But Mia did not give up. She noticed the struggle in Jake's eyes. To her, it was not a reason to stop. It was a challenge. She began to plan her moves carefully. She played on his doubts and dreams. One evening, while Anna went to a school meeting, Mia made a special dinner for Jake. She cooked his favorite food, opened expensive wine, and created a quiet, warm setting. They talked for hours. Mia guided the conversation toward Jake's dreams, his goals, the parts of him Anna never fully reached. Jake felt many emotions at once. He was flattered, he felt desire, and he also felt a deep guilt. He tried to change the topic and bring the mood back to normal, but Mia had already seen that he was unsure. She moved closer. Her hand touched his lightly. She looked into his eyes and said, "Do you ever wonder what it would feel like to be truly seen? To be with someone who really understands you?" The room felt heavy with emotion. Jake knew he should get up, walk away, and end this before it became something more. But he sat frozen, standing at the edge of a choice that could break everything. But something stopped him from moving. It felt like Mia had pulled him into her world. When her lips touched his in a strong kiss, Jake gave in. In that single moment, the ground beneath his marriage began to break. That moment started a chain of events that would lead to pain. No one could have imagined. The weeks after that night passed in a haze. Jake and Mia shared quick, hidden moments filled with passion and growing guilt. What started as one mistake quickly became a full affair. They found secret ways to meet, rushing into his office for short moments alone or planning fake business trips so they could leave town without anyone noticing. Mia enjoyed the danger of it all. Each hidden meeting made her feel powerful, as if she had won something over her sister. Jake, however, felt something different. He felt a mix of excitement and shame. Every meeting left him thrilled and broken at the same time. Mia was clever. She knew how to keep Jake close. She changed her behavior to match his needs. One moment she was full of desire, and the next she was gentle and caring. She listened to him when he talked about his stress at work and the dreams he had left behind. She gave him the attention and support he had been missing. "I have never met anyone like you, Jake," she would whisper when they were alone. "You deserve more than this small town." Her words were soft but powerful. Slowly, she made him question his life with Anna. She described a future full of love, adventure, and freedom, far from the quiet life he had settled into. Jake began to feel lost. He cared deeply for Anna, but also felt something strong for Mia. Living this double life started to change him. His mood would shift often. He acted in ways that Anna had never seen before at home. The guilt affected him deeply. Sometimes he could not even look at Anna. Other times, he tried too hard to be the perfect husband, hoping she would not see the truth behind his eyes. Sometimes, Jake would show Anna too much love, trying to make up for what he was hiding. He felt guilty, so he threw himself into work. He took on more projects than ever before. Work became both his excuse and his way to escape the pain he was feeling. Mia acted like the perfect sister-in-law. She spent time with Anna, asked about her day, and pretended to care. But inside, she enjoyed lying to her sister. There were brief moments when guilt appeared on her face. She knew she was hurting Anna, but those feelings quickly disappeared. Mia's desire for Jake and her need to finally be better than Anna were stronger as the affair grew. The risks became bigger. Mia and Jake started meeting in public places. Their need to be together made them careless. A neighbor almost saw them hugging. A friend of Anna's noticed them having dinner in another town. Each time, they came close to being caught. But instead of stopping, the danger made their relationship feel more exciting. However, as time passed, the pressure began to show. Jake was no longer full of energy. He felt nervous all the time. The guilt was eating him from the inside. It started to affect his work, his friends, and his family. He began to wonder if the excitement he felt with Mia was really worth losing everything he had built with Anna. Mia noticed the change. She tried harder to keep him close. She demanded more of his time. She said she loved him more often. Her tricks became clearer. She used both his guilt and his hidden wishes to control him. The affair reached its highest point, but neither Jake nor Mia saw that everything was about to fall apart. The truth, as it always does, was starting to rise. It was moving slowly but surely, ready to break the lives they had tried so hard to protect. While Mia and Jake were lost in their secret world, Anna was starting to put the pieces together. At first, the signs were small. She smelled a strange perfume on Jake's clothes. She heard him end phone calls quickly when she entered the room. He seemed more distant with every day. Anna always hoped for the best. She thought maybe he was just stressed or going through a hard time. She tried to fix things. She planned romantic dinners and weekend trips. But Jake never seemed truly interested. During this time, the one person Anna talked to the most was her sister. Mia listened, gave her advice, and acted like she cared. But every kind word only made the betrayal worse. As more time passed, Anna could no longer ignore the voice inside her. She started to notice small lies in Jake's stories. The late nights at the office, the trips out of town, none of it made sense. She began to notice how Mia looked at Jake. There was something in her eyes she could not ignore. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Anna found a matchbook in Jake's jacket. It was from a hotel in a nearby city, one she knew had nothing to do with his work. Her body froze. That small item confirmed what her heart had feared. Anna felt torn. She was afraid to know the full truth, but she could not keep pretending. Her mind was filled with worry. She stopped talking to friends. She could not bring herself to say the words out loud. If she did, it would make everything real. At night, she struggled to sleep. Her dreams were full of fear. She felt like her whole world was about to collapse. She began to watch Jake and Mia closely, paying attention to every small move, searching for any sign that could prove her fears true or false. In a moment of desperation, Anna even thought about hiring a private investigator. But the idea of strangers digging through her private life felt too painful to accept. Instead, she chose to face them herself. She decided to speak with Jake and Mia one by one, hoping that the pressure would cause one of them to break and admit the truth. What Anna did not know was that this choice would begin a series of events that would lead to a confrontation more painful than she could ever imagine. Nothing would be the same after that day. The final moment came on a dark and rainy afternoon in late autumn. Anna spent the whole morning preparing herself. She repeated the words in her head, planned how to stay calm, how to hold her emotions. And if her heart broke, when Jake walked through the front door, shaking the rain off his coat, he saw her standing in the living room. Her face was tight with emotion she could barely hold back. The air was thick with tension. He knew something was wrong. He knew this was the moment when their perfect lie would fall apart. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaking even, though she tried to sound strong. "I know about you and Mia." All the color left Jake's face. His mouth opened, then closed again. He could not find words. But in that silence, his face told the truth. Anna saw it clearly. The last hope inside her disappeared. "How long?" she asked louder now. "How long have you been sleeping with my sister?" Jake's body slumped. He knew there was no use lying anymore. "Anna, I am so sorry. It just happened." She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You did not mean to? What did you do? Trip and fall into her bed?" Her voice cracked with pain. "How could you do this to me?" Then it all came out. Every doubt, every tear, every question she had pushed down for months. She screamed at him. The house shook. With her words, Jake stood there, unable to defend himself, whispering weak apologies that only made her more hurt. Just when their voices reached their loudest, the front door opened. Mia stepped inside and froze. She looked at Anna, then at Jake. Her eyes moved, fast, searching for a way to explain, to escape that Anna's voice was sharp. Mia, how nice of you to join us. We were just talking about your affair with my husband. Mia's eyes filled with panic. She looked from one face to the other, but no words came. Jake tried to stop the fight. Please, let us all calm down. We can talk about this. His words only made things worse. Anna turned on him, shaking with rage. She grabbed a vase from the table and threw it with all her strength. It missed Jake by inches and smashed against the wall. The sound echoed through the room. That noise broke Mia's cold expression. For the first time, guilt showed on her face. She looked at Jake. He looked back. Neither knew what to say. Together, they slowly walked to the door as it closed behind them. Anna dropped onto the sofa. Her body shook with deep sobs. The life she had built, the trust, the love, the years, it had all fallen apart in a single afternoon. The future Anna once believed in had disappeared in just a few minutes. Everything she had planned, everything she trusted, had turned to dust. Outside, the storm crashed against the windows, and inside her mind, the same storm raged. She felt anger, shame, betrayal, and deep loss, all crashing into each other like waves. In that moment, something inside her shifted. She made a decision, one that would begin the final, heartbreaking chapter of this tragic story. At a small bar on the edge of town, the bartender, a tough and weathered man named Hank, watched her closely. He had seen many people come in to forget their pain, but there was something different about Anna that night. Her eyes looked wild, and it made him uneasy. Another, Anna said, her voice unsteady. Her words slurred slightly, but her eyes were sharp and full of pain. Hank hesitated, but the way she looked at him made him pour one more glass. He told himself it would be her last. The night grew later, and the bar slowly emptied until only Anna remained. She sat alone with her thoughts and her glass. The alcohol had softened her pain, but it also gave her a bitter sense of purpose. Around midnight, Hank walked over and spoke gently. Need me to call you a cab? Anna shook her head and waved him off. She dug through her purse and pulled out her car keys. I am fine. I just need to leave. Hank reached out to stop her, but she was already moving toward the door, her steps uneven. Outside, rain tapped against the pavement. Anna got into her car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. Her vision was blurred. Her hands were shaky. The road in front of her was dark and winding, barely lit by the moon. As she drove, her mind was full of chaos. She thought about Jake and Mia, the betrayal, the pain. She felt ashamed for not seeing it sooner. She was afraid of the future and what would come next. Her foot pressed harder on the gas pedal. The car picked up speed. Then came the sharp curve. In the road, one of the worst on the coast. Anna reached it too fast. Her tired and foggy mind could not react in time. The tires screamed against the pavement. The car began to slide. In one brief, clear moment, Anna realized what was happening. But it was too late. The metal guardrail bent and snapped. With a sound like breaking bones, the car flew off the edge of the cliff. It spun through the air, flipping again and again, before crashing down toward the rocks below. Then everything went dark. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over Mill Haven, Officer Liam Murphy received a call. A jogger had seen a wrecked car at the bottom of Whispering Cliffs. This part of the coastline was known for its danger. Murphy, a longtime officer in the small town, felt a heavy feeling in his chest. He drove to the scene in silence. When he arrived, he saw what was left of the silver sedan. The car was crushed and soaked from the ocean waves. It was barely a shape anymore. The rescue team worked to pull the wreck from the rocks. Murphy began to piece together what had happened. He walked around the wreck carefully. Then he saw the license plate. It was still there, somehow untouched. It was Anna Reed's car. Murphy closed his eyes for a moment. He felt a sharp pain in his chest. Everyone in Mill Haven knew Anna. The thought of telling her family, of saying the words out loud, was almost too much to bear. As the morning went on and the full tragedy came to light, whispers began to spread through the quiet streets of Mill Haven. Anna Reed, gone in what looked like a drunk driving accident. The idea felt unreal. It did not match the woman everyone had known. Careful, calm, and always in control. Detective Sarah Watson was called in from the nearest city to lead the case. From the beginning, she sensed that something was wrong. Small details caught her. Sharp eye. There were no skid marks on the road, which meant Anna had not tried to stop the car. The angle at which the vehicle went off the cliff did not seem right. And Anna drinking alone? Her closest friends said she never did that. When Detective Watson visited the Blunt house to deliver the news, she noticed something strange. The room felt tense. Jake's reaction to his wife's death was quiet, but not in a normal way. It felt cold, almost like he already knew. And Mia, Anna's sister, was already there that morning. Her presence, so early, raised questions in Watson's mind. In the days after Anna's death, Watson dug deeper. She began to peel back the peaceful image of Mill Haven and saw the hidden cracks beneath the surface. Her first step was to look at Anna's final hours. That search led her to the Rusty Anchor and to Hank, the old bartender who had served her that night. She was drinking like there was no tomorrow, Hank said, guilt heavy in his voice. I tried to stop her from leaving. His words clashed with everything Watson had learned about Anna. The woman her friends described was careful and responsible. This behavior did not fit. Watson's suspicions grew stronger. She turned her attention to Jake and Mia. Since Anna's death, the two had acted strangely. Instead of grieving alone, they leaned on each other, whispering in corners and sharing quiet looks. They would stop talking the moment someone else came near. The truth started to come out when Watson spoke to Anna's best friend, Olivia Chen. At first, Olivia did not want to say anything, but Watson was patient. Slowly, Olivia opened up. Anna told me something, Olivia said, her voice shaking. Just a few days before it happened, she believed Jake was having an affair with Mia. That changed everything. Watson moved fast. She dug into bank records and found proof of hotel stays and expensive gifts. All of them matched the times Jake had said he was away for work. It was clear something had been going on behind closed doors. Soon, Watson brought Jake and Mia in for interviews. She questioned them one by one. Their lies started to fall apart. Mia broke first. Yes, we were having an affair, she said, tears falling down her face. Anna found out that night. We had a terrible fight, all three of us. But I swear, we did not know she had left the house after that. Jake, faced with Mia's confession, finally admitted the truth. We made a terrible mistake, he said. His voice was empty. But I loved Anna. I would never want this to happen. Detective Watson believed them. She did not think they had planned to harm Anna, but she knew they had caused the pain that led to her death. Her final report made it clear. Anna, heartbroken after learning the truth, turned to alcohol. Her decision to drive that night was her own, but it was a decision shaped by betrayal and deep emotional pain. That N01 was charged with a crime. But that did not matter in Mill Haven. News of the affair spread quickly. Everyone knew what had happened. People whispered about Jake and Mia in grocery stores and at church. Their reputations were destroyed. The guilt would follow them for the rest of their lives. Time passed. The pain became less sharp. But the story stayed in Mill Haven like a scar that would never fully fade. The town moved on, slowly. But it never forgot what happened to Anna Reed. On the outside, Mill Haven looked peaceful. Quiet streets, friendly smiles, and calm days gave the town its charm. But the people who lived there now carried a different understanding. They had learned that under the still surface of small-town life, strong emotions and hidden secrets could rise like a storm. The loss of Anna Reed had changed everything. Her story left a deep scar on the heart of Mill Haven. It reminded everyone that even in the quietest places, heartbreak and betrayal could hide in plain sight. And from that day forward, no one in town would ever look at their neighbors the same way again.
An afternoon in July 2019, a peaceful neighborhood was shaken by something that people would never forget. At the center of this tragic event were the Whitmores. Daniel was a 45-year-old investment banker known for working hard and being involved in the community. His wife, Claire, was 43 years old and taught yoga part-time. She was full of energy and always had a warm, welcoming laugh. They had lived in the neighborhood for over 10 years, and many people admired their marriage, thinking it was perfect. Next door to them lived the Coopers. Linda was a widow, and her son, Ryan, was a 19-year-old college student who was home for the summer. The Coopers had moved into the neighborhood 5 years earlier. They were not as social as some of the other neighbors, But most people liked them. No one could have guessed that these two families would become connected in a way that would end in disaster. Daniel had always been focused on success. He was born into a working-class family in a small town in Iowa. Through hard work and determination, he built a successful career in finance. By his early 30s, he was already doing well, known for his sharp mind and serious approach to handling money. His co-workers respected him, and his clients trusted him. Claire, whose last name before marriage was Sinclair, had a very different background. Her father was a college professor, and her mother was an artist. She was raised in a home that encouraged creativity. She studied modern dance at a university and dreamed of performing on stage. But a knee injury in her final year of college forced her to change her plans. She turned to yoga and wellness coaching instead. Daniel and Claire met in 2003 at a charity event. He was already successful but lacked confidence in social settings. He was immediately drawn to Claire's bright personality. She, on the other hand, saw Daniel as a man who could offer her stability and a secure future. They got married the next year in a grand wedding that everyone talked about. The first few years of their marriage were happy. Daniel continued to grow in his career and took pride in providing Claire with a good life. Claire fully embraced the role of a supportive wife, hosting social gatherings and attending events that helped Daniel make important business connections. At the same time, she taught yoga part-time at a high-end studio. She enjoyed helping people find balance and peace through yoga. But as time went on, problems started to appear in their relationship. Daniel became more focused on work, spending longer hours at the office. He was always chasing bigger deals and more important clients. He often came home late, and even when he was there, he was distracted, checking his phone for work updates. Claire, as she got closer to 40, started feeling unsatisfied with her life. What once made her happy, yoga, charity work, and social gatherings, now felt empty. She wondered if she had given up her dreams for a life that looked perfect but did not feel fulfilling. Another difficulty in their marriage was their struggle to have children. Despite years of trying, they had not been able to conceive, which added more stress to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Whitmores' marriage was only a show for the outside world. To others, they still seemed like the ideal couple. Thaddeus was excelling at work and had just closed a deal that put him in line for a promotion. Claire's yoga classes were more popular than ever, and people admired her peaceful presence. But behind closed doors, they were more like strangers. When they did speak to each other, their conversations were brief and distant. When they did talk, their conversations were brief and mostly about their schedules or social events. There was little warmth left between them. Physical closeness had almost disappeared, and when it did happen, it was filled with unspoken frustration and unmet expectations. Neither Daniel nor Claire was willing to admit, even to themselves, how distant they had become. It was easier to pretend everything was fine and continue acting like a happy couple rather than face the growing emptiness between them. They had no idea that this hidden gap in their marriage was about to lead to a tragedy that would not only destroy their lives but shake the entire Riverside community. The Coopers had moved into the house next to the Whitmores in 2014, after Linda Carter's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper, passed away. He had been a well-respected cancer specialist but had lost his own battle with the very disease he spent his life treating. Linda was left alone to raise their son, Ryan. She was a quiet librarian who had a hard time adjusting to life in a new neighborhood. Leaving their home in St. Paul was necessary because every corner of the old house reminded her of her husband. But this wealthy suburb felt unfamiliar and unwelcoming to her. She found comfort in her books and in taking care of her garden, which soon became one of the most admired in the neighborhood. Ryan was 14 when they moved in, a thin and shy boy who preferred computers over people. Starting at a new school was difficult, and he was often bullied for his second-hand clothes and quiet nature. During that time, Daniel Whitmore had taken an interest in Ryan, offering him a small job mowing lawns and doing odd tasks around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Ryan changed. He grew into a confident and good-looking young man, and his natural intelligence found a place in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, he remained close to his mother. He worried about her loneliness and always made sure to visit home on weekends, even when his friends were planning trips or parties. On one of these weekend visits in early June, something unexpected happened. It was then that Ryan saw Claire Whitmore in a new way. Linda had always been thankful to the Whitmores, especially for Claire, who tried to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke about Claire's kindness, never realizing the complicated emotions hidden beneath her son's polite smiles. The start of the affair between Claire Whitmore and Ryan Carter was both sudden and intense. It happened on a warm evening in early June at one of the Whitmores' famous summer barbecues. As usual, Daniel was standing near the grill, entertaining his colleagues with stories of his latest business success. Claire, feeling out of place in the crowd, went to the pool house to get more ice. Ryan, who had only come to the party because his mother insisted, also needed a break from the noise and forced conversations. When he walked into the pool house, he did not expect to see Claire there. She was struggling with a heavy bag of ice. Their eyes met, and something changed in that moment. Ryan stepped forward to help her, their hands touching briefly. For a second, they both stood still, the cold ice in contrast with the heat growing between them. It was Claire who finally spoke, her voice slightly shaky as she thanked him. Ryan, who was usually well-spoken, found himself stumbling over his words. That short moment set everything in motion. In the weeks that followed, Claire and Ryan kept finding excuses to see each other. At first, it seemed harmless. Claire asked Ryan for help with her laptop, and Ryan offered to assist with her garden. But every interaction between them carried an unspoken attraction. They both tried to ignore it, but the tension grew stronger with each meeting. Almost a month after the barbecue, their first kiss happened. Ryan had been helping Claire set up for a yoga class in the park. Just as they finished, a sudden summer storm hit. They ran for cover under a small gazebo, laughing and out of breath as rain poured around them. Claire looked at Ryan and felt something she had not felt in years. Before she could stop herself, she leaned in and kissed him. From that moment, their relationship quickly became more intense. They were careless, caught up in Ryan's youthful passion and Claire's desperate need to feel alive again. They met in hidden places, at the back of the local movie theater, in a quiet corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, inside the Whitmore home when Daniel was at work. Each meeting left them wanting more, forgetting the difference in their ages and the risk they were taking. Claire felt like a new person, reconnecting with a side of herself she thought was gone. Ryan, on the other hand, was drawn in by Claire's experience and the secrecy of their relationship. But as summer went on, the pressure of keeping their secret began to take a toll. Close calls became more frequent. A neighbor almost saw them together. Linda seemed suspicious when Claire's name started coming up too often in Ryan's conversations. Guilt also began to creep in. Ryan struggled with the fact that he was betraying Daniel, a man who had always been good to him. Claire found herself telling more and more lies to her husband, each one making their marriage feel even weaker. Yet, despite the guilt and the risks, neither of them could stop. They were caught in something too powerful, unable to see the disaster waiting ahead. July 15, 2019, was hot and heavy with the feeling of an approaching storm. Riverside woke up as usual, its people getting ready for another week of work and daily routines. For Daniel Whitmore, the morning was like any other. He woke early, put on one of his perfectly pressed suits, and left for the office before Claire even got out of bed. Claire woke up later, her mind already planning the day. Daniel had told her the night before that he would be working late, attending an important client dinner that could secure his promotion. To Claire, this meant one thing, an opportunity. She sent a message to Ryan, her heart beating fast as she invited him over in the afternoon. Ryan had been feeling uneasy about the affair for days. When he saw Claire's message, he decided this was his chance to end things. He replied with a short okay, determined to break it off before things got even worse. The day moved slowly for both of them. Claire went through her morning yoga class, but instead of her usual calmness, she felt restless. Her students noticed something was different about her. Ryan, at his summer job, struggled to focus on the computer screen in front of him. His thoughts kept drifting back to Claire and the conversation they needed to have. At 2:30 p.m., Ryan walked next door, making sure no neighbors were watching. Claire quickly let him inside, her face a mix of excitement and nervousness. Ryan was the first to speak, trying to explain that they needed to talk. But Claire, misunderstanding his intentions and desperate to feel wanted, did not let him finish. Instead, she pulled him into a deep kiss. Despite his doubts, Ryan found himself giving in, unable to resist Claire's intensity. What happened next was a blur. Clothes were tossed aside, and soon they were in the master bedroom. Any thoughts Ryan had about ended the affair disappeared as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Whitmore sat in his office, staring at his computer screen with frustration. The numbers in his client presentation were not adding up, and he realized he would have to redo much of the work. Growing annoyed, he made a quick decision. He would go home, take a short break, and return to the office later to finish before the important dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Daniel pulled into the driveway. He noticed Ryan Carter's old Honda parked down the street but did not think much of it. He assumed Ryan was helping Linda with something. Unlocking the front door, he stepped inside. The house was silent, but something felt off. On the coffee table sat a half-empty glass of wine. It was unusual for Claire to drink at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled noise from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the sounds growing louder as he reached the master bedroom. He pushed open the door, and what he saw would stay with him forever. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Ryan Carter, the young man he had mentored and trusted. Rage and pain exploded inside him. With a furious roar, Daniel rushed forward. His hands, which had spent years handling business deals and financial reports, were now clenched into fists. He grabbed Ryan, yanking him off the bed. Claire screamed, trying to cover herself and separate the two men, but it was useless. Daniel's first punch landed hard on Ryan's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Running on fear and adrenaline, Ryan fought back. The two men struggled, slamming into the dresser, knocking over framed photos and scattering objects across the floor. No one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that had fallen from the dresser. No one saw it until Daniel, blinded by fury, grabbed it. Before anyone could react, he brought it down on Ryan's head with a sickening thud. A deep silence followed. Ryan collapsed onto the floor, blood pooling quickly around his still body. Claire's scream filled the air as the horror of what had just happened hit them. Outside, storm clouds darkened the sky, and in the distance, sirens wailed. At that moment, the lives of everyone involved changed forever. The peaceful image of Riverside had been destroyed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Police sirens cut through the usual quiet of the neighborhood. Curious but nervous neighbors peeked out from their windows as squad cars and an ambulance stopped in front of the Whitmore house. Officers entering the home found a scene that would stay with them for years. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his hands covered in blood, his head in his hands, staring blankly at the floor. Claire, barely dressed and in complete shock, was sobbing uncontrollably. The room showed clear signs of a fight, overturned furniture, broken glass, and blood smeared on the wooden floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran homicide investigator, arrived and took charge. Her first priority was getting medical attention for Ryan. As paramedics worked desperately to stabilize him, Rossi started piecing together the events that led to this moment. Daniel, still dazed and silent, was taken into custody without any struggle. Claire was questioned separately, but her answers were fragmented and emotional. Their stories painted a picture of a troubled marriage that had finally erupted into violence. As word spread, a crowd formed near the police line. Among them was Linda Carter. When she heard the news of her son's condition, she collapsed in grief. Linda was quickly taken to the hospital, where Ryan was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. Meanwhile, the investigation moved fast. Forensic teams searched the Whitmore home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now seen as a possible murder weapon, was carefully placed in an evidence bag. Neighbors were questioned. Some mentioned how close the Whitmores and the Coopers had once seemed. One neighbor recalled hearing loud voices from the Whitmore home earlier that afternoon but had dismissed it, thinking it was just a television playing. Another neighbor noted that Ryan had entered the Whitmore house around 2:30 p.m. and found it odd, considering Daniel's usual work schedule. As night fell, the reality of the situation became clear. At 9:47 p.m., Ryan Carter was pronounced dead. He had never regained consciousness. With this news, the charge against Daniel Whitmore changed from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details surfaced. Claire, overwhelmed by guilt and facing intense public judgment, admitted to the affair. Through tears, she gave a statement at the police station, revealing the timeline of her relationship with Ryan and the events of that day. Daniel, advised by the lawyer he had quickly hired, refused to speak. However, his co-workers at the firm described him as a man under extreme stress, working long hours in hopes of securing a promotion that had seemed within reach. No one, however, had suspected how troubled his marriage was or imagined he could be capable of such violence. As the case against Daniel grew stronger, Detective Rossi understood that there would be no simple heroes or villains in this story. In different ways, everyone involved had become a victim of secrets and lies that had finally surfaced in the most tragic way possible. But no one expected the shocking twist that was about to change everything. The trial of Daniel Whitmore began 6 months later on a crisp autumn morning. The county courthouse, a grand red brick building with white columns, was surrounded by reporters and spectators eager to witness the trial that had gripped the community. Inside, the courtroom was filled with tension. The judge called the court to order, and the prosecution presented its case. Veronica Talbot, a sharp and relentless attorney, painted Daniel as a man consumed by jealousy and rage who had violently killed a young man with his whole future ahead of him. Her words were clear and powerful, her eyes moving across the jury as she promised to prove his guilt beyond any doubt. The defense had a different story to tell. Daniel's lawyer, a skilled attorney named Sterling, argued that his client was a loving husband and respected member of the community who had been pushed to his breaking point by a painful betrayal. Sterling claimed that Ryan's death was not murder but a tragic accident, the result of a heated confrontation that had gone too far. What happened next in the trial would leave everyone speechless as the trial went on. Many witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts explained the blood patterns and the amount of force needed to cause Ryan's fatal injury. Neighbors shared what they had seen that day, and people who knew both Daniel and Ryan spoke about their personalities and reputations. But it was Claire Whitmore's testimony that held the courtroom's attention. For 2 long days, she spoke about how her marriage had fallen apart and how her relationship with Ryan had begun. Her voice shook as she described the moment Daniel walked in on them and the terrible fight that followed. During cross-examination, Daniel's lawyer tried to portray her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had pushed her husband to lose control. But Claire did not back down. She admitted her role in the affair and the events that led to that day but insisted that nothing justified Ryan's death. Linda Carter's testimony was short but deeply emotional. Still grieving, she spoke about her son's kindness and his hopes for the future, dreams that had been cut short in a single act of violence. Her quiet strength moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Daniel Whitmore. Despite his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony showed a man torn between remorse and anger. He talked about the pressure he had been under at work, the growing distance between him and Claire, and the shock of discovering his wife's affair. When describing the fight with Ryan, Daniel claimed he never meant to seriously hurt him, that he had simply lost control. Psychologists were also called to testify. Dr. Cho, an expert in human behavior, explained that Daniel's actions could be understood through what is known as intermittent explosive disorder, a condition where a person has sudden and intense bursts of anger that seem out of proportion to the situation. She pointed out that his stressful job, his unhappiness in his marriage, and the shock of Claire's betrayal all played a role in his reaction. However, when questioned by the prosecution, Dr. Cho admitted that while these factors might explain Daniel's actions, they did not excuse them. She reminded the jury that many people face stress and heartbreak without resorting to violence. The defense also brought in a marriage therapist, who explained the deep emotional pain that comes with discovering a spouse's affair. He compared it to psychological trauma, saying that such betrayal can trigger extreme emotional reactions. These expert testimonies showed how complex human behavior can be. They revealed how a mix of personal history, social expectations, and immediate emotions can combine to create a tragic moment. After 7 long weeks of testimony, arguments, and evidence, the jury was given the task of deciding Daniel Whitmore's fate. Judge Blackwell dismissed them to begin their discussions, and the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Later, after a short break, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver the sentence. Considering the violent nature of the crime, Daniel's clean legal record, and the unusual circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the chance for parole after 12 years. As Daniel was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of what had happened seemed to settle over the courtroom. There were no winners, only lives forever changed by a moment of passion and an instant of violence. Outside the courthouse, as news of the verdict spread, reactions were divided. Some believed justice had been served, while others thought the sentence was either too harsh or too light. But one thing was clear: the events in Riverside had left a permanent mark on the community, and no one would forget what had happened.